Something kept tapping on the cabin door during my patrol, and I knew from the very first echo that it wasn't supposed to be there. The sound came in slow, deliberate knocks, each one curling into the shadows like smoke, carrying a weight that made my chest tighten. My name is Alex, I'm 32, and I've been a forest ranger in the Cascades for nearly a decade. The mountains have been my home, the trees my companions, and the air thick with pine resin and frost my constant presence. I thought I understood these woods, every fallen branch, every winding trail, every creek that twists through the thick underbrush. But that night, the forest reminded me just how little I actually knew. I had been on patrol for hours that evening, the late sun slicing through the canopy in golden shards that barely touched the forest floor. The usual chorus of birds had gone quiet, replaced by the distant rustle of leaves and the low whistle of wind through the pines. There's a rhythm to these woods, a pulse you learn if you spend enough nights alone with the dark. And usually that rhythm brings comfort. That night, it brought tension, an uneasy stillness that made every shadow look too large and every breeze feel like it carried a message. My cabin was a small, weathered structure perched on a ridge overlooking a narrow valley. I'd stayed in it countless times, alone, without incident. The heater hummed low in the corner, and the kettle was already warming on the stove when I noticed the first tap. It was soft but distinct, like a cautious finger testing a threshold. I froze mid-step, listening. The forest outside was silent, too silent, and every instinct I had honed over years whispered that I was not alone. The taps continued, slow and measured, each one scraping at the door as if whatever was out there was trying to draw me into its world without speaking. I told myself it was probably a raccoon or a deer, maybe even the wind shifting just right to knock a branch against the wood. My mind ran through the rational explanations, but even as I did, a chill crept along my spine, a cold knot that made my hands clammy. I tried to convince myself to move on, to laugh it off, but the tapping didn't stop. It became almost conversational in its persistence, a deliberate rhythm that mocked my denial. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness as I approached the door. My heart thumped in my chest, a relentless drum that seemed louder than the taps themselves. The forest was pressing against the walls, or maybe it was pressing against me. I stepped onto the porch, the boards groaning underfoot, and shined the light across the clearing. Nothing, just the trees, their shadows long and jagged, stretching across the ground like fingers. My rational mind tried to reassert itself, an animal, a branch, the wind, but the unease had taken root, and no logical explanation could chase it away. The tapping stopped. My chest loosened slightly, relief warming me like the heater inside. And then it started again, but this time it was closer, heavier, more deliberate. My stomach sank as I realized it wasn't coming from the door. The sound had shifted, echoing from the window beside it. The glass rattled under the weight of each tap, and the shadows inside the cabin seemed to stretch toward me, twisting unnaturally in the dim light. I backed away slowly, my hand brushing the wooden railing, my mind racing. I should have run, called for backup, but something, I don't know what, kept me rooted to the spot. Fear is a strange thing. It can paralyze even the most trained instincts, and I was frozen by the simple impossibility of what I was experiencing. I turned the flashlight toward the window, every nerve on fire, and that's when I saw it. A shape, dark and towering, barely moving but unmistakable in its outline, standing just beyond the glass. I could make out the broad shoulders, the length of the arms, like the head tilted slightly as though it were studying me, considering me. My breath caught in my throat. I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of it. A bear? Too tall. A man? No. The proportions were wrong. And then it vanished. Just like that, it was gone, leaving only the cold night and the quiet whisper of the wind through the trees. My rational mind demanded an explanation, and I offered one, a trick of the light, my imagination playing games. But deep down, I knew better. Something was out there, watching, waiting, and for the first time in years, I felt that the forest itself was a predator, patient and calculating, and I was no longer the protector. I spent the rest of the night on edge, every sound a potential threat, every shadow a lurking figure. The taps never returned, but the sense of being watched didn't leave me. When morning came, I checked the perimeter, scoured the trees, and found nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no evidence of another presence. Only the lingering scent of wet earth and pine resin, sharp and intoxicating, filling my senses as if the forest itself had inhaled my fear and exhaled it back into the cold morning air. It took me days to shake the feeling, to reclaim the confidence I usually carried like armor. And yet, I couldn't ignore the lesson it left behind. The forest is alive in ways we cannot measure, its silence as meaningful as its storms, and the line between reason and instinct is thinner than we like to admit. That night, the taps on the door became more than a sound. They became a reminder that fear isn't something to be conquered, but something to be respected, studied, understood. And in understanding it, I began to see the forest differently, not as a playground of trails and maps, but as a living entity with secrets it might never share. Over the weeks that followed, I continued my patrols, each step measured, each sound cataloged, each shadow noted. The fear didn't vanish, it evolved, shaping how I moved, how I listened, how I breathed. I started to recognize patterns in the silence, cues that had always been there but that I had ignored. A snapping twig, a distant howl, the way the mist gathers in low hollows. They weren't random, they were messages, warnings, and sometimes invitations. And through it all, I learned to embrace the tension, to walk with fear as a companion rather than an enemy. Because only in that embrace could I truly navigate the darkness without losing myself to it. The forest seemed to lean in closer after that night, as if it had noticed the tremor in my confidence and was curious to see how I would respond. Days bled into nights, and every patrol felt heavier than the last. I started noticing things I had always brushed aside, small, subtle details that gnawed at the edges of my mind, footprints that didn't match any animal I knew, tufts of fur, black as midnight, caught on branches where nothing should have brushed, and the way the shadows seemed to shift with intent rather than randomness. At first, I tried to dismiss them, chalk them up to imagination or careless campers, but the instinct that had kept me alive in this forest for years refused to let me ignore it. One evening, a week after the tapping, I was patrolling the ridge above the northern valley, the air thick with fog that muffled the world and turned the familiar into a realm of uncertainty. My flashlight cut a narrow swath through the mist, and every step I took felt like intrusion into some living memory of the forest. That's when I heard it, an unmistakable crack of a branch, close, deliberate, yet without the cadence of an animal. I froze, gripping my radio, but my voice died in my throat. It came again, slower this time, like someone or something was pacing, circling, sizing me up. I swung the flashlight toward the sound, and there it was. Not human, not bear, not elk. Its silhouette was hulking and disproportionate, broad at the shoulders, arms hanging longer than any man's could, moving with a grace that made no sense for something so large. The fog wrapped around it, half concealing, half revealing, and my rational mind scrambled for an explanation. I told myself it must be a bear on hind legs, a trick of the mist, but even as I reasoned, the creature tilted its head. Its eyes, or what I could make out of them, gleamed in the faint light, and it regarded me with a calculation that left no room for doubt. I was being studied, observed, catalogued. Fear surged in a new form. This wasn't just the forest testing me. This was something else entirely, ancient and deliberate. My training screamed at me to retreat, to radio in, to do anything but stand still, but my legs felt rooted, and then it moved. Not fast, but with intent. A silent, measured advance that pushed the fog aside like water. My breathing hitched. Every rational thought, every mantra about wilderness safety, about bear encounters, about distance protocols, vanished under the weight of the impossible. I backed slowly, turning toward a denser stand of pines where I might find cover or a better vantage. The creature mirrored my movement, never breaking stride, never making a sound beyond the faint whisper of its presence brushing the undergrowth. My heart hammered like a drum in my chest, and I could feel the forest around us tighten, the fog curling, branches bending, the air growing dense as if it were aware of the confrontation. Then a sound I had never associated with nature came, a low, guttural humming, vibrating through the ground beneath my boots. I recognized instinctively that it wasn't a growl or a call. It was communication, and it was directed at me. My stomach turned, but somewhere deep in my core, a flicker of something else emerged, fascination. Fear and awe danced in tandem, twisting my resolve. I had stared at this forest for years and never truly understood it. Now I was confronted with something that defied explanation, and I couldn't look away. I finally made the decision to run. The dense fog hid the terrain, every step uncertain, every shadow a potential trap. My legs pumped, my breath tearing through my chest, and behind me, I could hear the faint rustle of movement, not chasing, not fleeing, but keeping pace, always just beyond my vision. When I reached a clearing, the fog thinned slightly, and I dared a glance back. It was gone, vanished into the mist like it had never existed. The silence that followed was almost worse than the encounter. My pulse pounded, my muscles screamed, and yet the forest felt expectant, as if it were holding its breath with me. In the hours that followed, I traced my path, scouring for footprints, for fur, for any sign. There was nothing. No marks, no disturbed foliage, no evidence that anything had moved beyond what my eyes had seen. Only the lingering vibration in the ground, faint but undeniable, as if the forest itself remembered the encounter and was reminding me that it had the power to erase, to conceal, to challenge my perception of reality. Sleep that night was fractured. Every creak of the cabins, every whistle of the wind through the eaves sent me to full alert. I lay awake, flashlight across my chest, listening for the taps, the hums, the whispers I thought I had imagined. The line between instinct and paranoia blurred. I questioned whether I had truly seen the creature, or if it was a manifestation of all the long, solitary nights in the woods, a culmination of anxiety and fear, manifesting into a form my mind could recognize. And yet, the memory was too vivid, too tactile. The fog, the hum, the cold pressure of presence. In the following days, I found myself adjusting my patrols. I moved differently, scanning shadows not as routine but as survival. My thoughts constantly returned to that night, to the way the forest itself seemed alive with intelligence beyond my comprehension. Every sound became layered, every shadow a puzzle, every silence a potential warning. I even began to notice patterns in the subtle details, the timing of rustling leaves, the way fog hugged the valleys, the repetition of small taps against my cabin door in the wind. The forest had become a teacher of vigilance, of humility, and I realized of fear as a tool rather than an obstacle. One night, weeks later, the taps returned. Not at the door this time, but from the far side of the cabin, where the old storage shed leaned and shadows pooled like spilled ink. I froze, listening. The sound was soft at first, tentative, then persistent, deliberate, like a slow heartbeat drumming against the wood. I approached with my flashlight and saw the faint outline of the creature through the misty darkness, standing near the shed, watching. My hands trembled as I raised the beam, illuminating only the mist and partial shape. Then, without a sound, it vanished again. That night I stayed awake until dawn, notebook in hand, recording every sound, every shadow, every instinctual reaction. I began documenting patterns, cataloging strange phenomena, trying to impose reason on something that defied it. I realized the forest was not meant to be conquered or fully understood. The creatures, the sounds, the taps, they were part of its language, and I was only learning to listen. Fear had transformed from a paralyzing force into a guide, a companion that sharpened perception, forcing vigilance, humility, and awareness. And through all of it, I understood something essential. The forest, with all its shadows and secrets, was never cruel, never malicious. It simply existed beyond the bounds of human comprehension, and those of us who entered it carried the responsibility to observe, respect, and survive. I had faced impossible fear and, in a way, emerged more attuned, more alive, more present in every step I took among the trees. The taps on the cabin door had become more than a sound. They were a reminder of the fragility of reason, the depth of instinct, and the subtle unspoken lessons of the forest that had been waiting all along. The nights grew longer and heavier after that. I started to feel it everywhere, the weight of the forest pressing against me, the sense of being watched even in broad daylight. It wasn't just the creature anymore. It was the forest itself, alive in ways I had never imagined. The trees no longer felt like silent sentinels. They were conspirators, bending shadows just so, funneling the fog into low valleys, hiding things in plain sight. Every patrol became an exercise in tension, each step a negotiation with an unseen intelligence. One evening, I decided to check an old cave along the northern ridge, a place I had passed a dozen times but never explored. The air smelled of damp stone and decayed leaves, and a chill ran deeper than the temperature warranted. I had a hunch, something gnawing at the edge of my thoughts, that the creature, or whatever it was, had some connection to this cave. As I approached, I noticed strange markings carved into the rock, crude yet deliberate, jagged lines that didn't match any known animal tracks or human handiwork I had encountered. I shone my flashlight inside, the beam slicing through a fog that seemed to seep from the cave itself, curling around the edges like smoke. The sound hit me first, a low, resonant tapping like the cabin door all over again, but amplified in the hollow of the cave. My pulse quickened. The air felt thicker, almost viscous, as if breathing required effort. I stepped in cautiously, my boots echoing in the darkness. Then I saw it, the creature, taller than any man, broad-shouldered, fur-matted and dark, sitting just beyond the reach of my light. Its head tilted in the same studying manner, the hum vibrating through the stone beneath my feet. I froze, every instinct screaming to run, yet my curiosity rooted me in place. I realized then that the creature wasn't moving. It was waiting. I could feel the intelligence in its stillness, a presence that measured my fear and resolve simultaneously. The hum escalated, low and insistent, vibrating through the walls, through my chest. I wanted to speak, to assert my humanity, but my voice caught in my throat. Time stretched, each second heavier than the last, until the fog within the cave seemed to press against me, forming shapes that danced at the edge of perception. I backed out slowly, careful not to break eye contact. The creature didn't follow. Instead, it remained a silent sentinel of the cave, as though guarding secrets I was not meant to touch. Outside, the forest welcomed me back with a sighing wind that rattled the treetops and whispered through the valleys. The encounter left me shaken, more aware of the precarious balance between curiosity and survival. Over the following nights, I noticed more signs, footprints that appeared and disappeared, the hum returning intermittently, strange scratches on the bark of trees. Sleep became elusive. Every creak of my cabin, every gust of wind, every distant howl was enough to send my senses into overdrive. The rational explanations I had relied upon for years began to crumble under the weight of repeated experiences. I began documenting everything meticulously, recording sounds, noting changes in temperature, the alignment of shadows, the timing of taps and hums. It became a kind of ritual, a way to impose order on something inherently unordered, to maintain a fragile grip on reality. One particularly fog-drenched night, I patrolled near the valley's edge, flashlight in hand, when I heard the taps again, closer, sharper, as if the forest itself had taken a stance. My heart pounded as I traced the sound to a small clearing where moonlight barely penetrated. There, between two massive pines, I saw it, its outline unmistakable, moving with a grace that defied its size, its eyes gleaming with something I couldn't name. I froze, the fog curling around us like a living thing. I tried to reason with myself, to assert control, but the forest wouldn't allow it. The hum grew louder, resonant in my bones, vibrating through the ground, and a panic surged, threatening to overtake me, but somehow I remembered the first lesson the taps had taught me. Fear is not always an enemy. I stood my ground, observing, listening, allowing the forest and the creature to reveal themselves on their own terms. Minutes, or maybe hours, passed in this suspended state. Then, without warning, it vanished. The fog lifted slightly, the clearing empty, and I was left with the oppressive stillness of the forest and the echo of the hum vibrating faintly in my ears. The encounter left me drained but enlightened, a fragile understanding threading through my consciousness. There is a presence here older than any ranger, older than the maps and trails, something that moves beyond human comprehension and yet observes us with meticulous attention. From that night on, my patrols changed. I moved with deliberate caution, attuned to the subtle cues of the forest, the way the fog pooled in hollows, the irregularities in sound, the patterns of movement that suggested unseen eyes. I learned to listen without judgment, to feel without panic, and to respect the invisible forces that shaped this wild place. The taps, the hums, the fleeting glimpses of that impossible figure became markers, lessons in humility and awareness. By the end of the season, I understood something fundamental. The forest, with all its shadows and secrets, was not an adversary, but a mirror, reflecting our deepest fears and our capacity for vigilance, courage, and patience. The creature, the taps, the caves, the fog, they were not here to harm me, but to teach me, to show that fear is not weakness, that awareness is survival, and that sometimes the most profound lessons are found not in clarity, but in the unexplained, the impossible, and the terrifying. The fog thickened that night as I approached the lower valley, the mist curling around my boots and seeping into every crevice of the trail. My flashlight cut a narrow path through the gray, illuminating glimpses of broken branches, slick moss, and the occasional glint of water pooling in rock hollows. The forest felt alive in a way that transcended my usual vigilance. It was as if the trees themselves were leaning in, listening, judging. Each breath I drew felt heavier, every sound amplified, the distant snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the soft sighing of the wind. I knew I was not alone. I had learned to trust the instincts the forest had sharpened in me, the subtle warnings that had once seemed paranoid. When I reached a small clearing, the taps began again, faint at first, then growing stronger, more insistent, like a heartbeat against the ribs of the earth. I froze, the hairs on my neck bristling. The sound was different from before, not the hesitant testing of a cabin door, but deliberate, purposeful, almost ceremonial. I felt the forest shift with it, the fog thickening, the temperature dropping, and a strange metallic scent cutting through the pine, iron and earth, damp and tangy. I followed the taps cautiously, my boots sinking into the soft moss, the flashlight swinging slowly, my senses coiled tight. That's when I saw it, emerging from the fog like a living shadow, taller than any man, broader than any bear, its dark matted fur catching the faint light, its eyes, deep and intelligent, fixated on me. My chest constricted, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. It stood perfectly still, its presence folding the fog around it, the low hum vibrating through my bones. I realized with a jolt that this was no ordinary creature. It carried the weight of the forest itself, a sentinel older than any human memory. Panic surged through me, but training, curiosity, and some stubborn fragment of courage rooted me in place. I raised my flashlight, forcing my eyes to meet its gaze to confirm that I was not imagining it. Its head tilted slightly, studying me with an almost judicial calm, as if evaluating my worthiness to remain in its domain. The tapping became synchronized with the hum, creating a rhythm that resonated deep inside my chest. My rational mind struggled to maintain control, to rationalize the impossible, but it was no use. The evidence was tangible, palpable, undeniable. And then it moved, not in a rush, not in a chase, but with deliberate intent, advancing a few steps and stopping, allowing the fog to swirl around its massive frame. I felt my legs quiver, the adrenaline threatening to betray me. My pulse pounded in my ears, every nerve on edge, but a strange part of me, the part that had been honed by countless nights patrolling alone, insisted on observation, on understanding. This was no ordinary threat. It was a test, a boundary, a reminder of the limits of human perception. I backed slowly, careful not to provoke it, the hum and taps maintaining their hypnotic cadence. My mind raced with possibilities. Was this a creature of folklore, a misidentified animal, or something beyond the rational world entirely? Each step I took was measured, deliberate, my flashlight beam trembling as I sought both reassurance and evidence. The forest seemed to guide me, or perhaps confine me, every shadow and rustle reinforcing the fragile line between reason and instinct. Suddenly, a branch snapped behind me, sharp and startling. I spun, heart hammering, and the creature was gone. The fog seemed to swallow it whole, leaving only the cold silence and the lingering echo of the taps and hum. I exhaled shakily, my muscles trembling from tension and relief, the reality of what I had seen crashing into me. I was alone, but the memory of its presence weighed heavily, like an imprint burned into the forest itself. I spent the remainder of the night documenting every detail, every sensation, every nuance of sound, smell, and movement. The forest seemed to hum in tandem with my writing, the fog curling around the cabin, the trees creaking in sympathy or warning. Sleep was impossible. Even lying down, I felt its eyes on me, invisible but inescapable, and I realized that my understanding of fear, of vigilance, and of presence had been irrevocably altered. Weeks passed. I began to notice subtle patterns, the timing of the taps, the alignment of shadows, the way fog pooled in low areas, and the rhythm of the creature's movement. I learned to move through the forest with a heightened awareness, listening, observing, respecting the intelligence that existed beyond human comprehension. Fear was no longer merely a paralyzing force. It was an instrument, a guide, a language I was only beginning to decipher. The final encounter came on a night when the moon was hidden, and the fog was so dense that the world beyond the clearing disappeared entirely. The taps began again, echoing in the trees, reverberating in my chest, synchronized with the low resonant hum that had become a signature of this presence. I followed the sound deeper into the valley, my boots pressing into the moss, my flashlight cutting through the gray like a knife. There it was, in a small hollow surrounded by twisted pines. The creature stood, taller than I could measure, its eyes gleaming, intelligent, almost mournful. The fog swirled around it, coiling like smoke, and the air seemed to vibrate with the rhythm of the taps and hum. My chest tightened, and a surge of raw emotion hit me. Fear, yes, but also awe, respect, and a deep, unshakable understanding. I raised my flashlight, not to threaten, not to illuminate, but to acknowledge, and in that moment, something shifted. The creature tilted its head, studied me, and then stepped back, dissolving into the fog with a grace that was both terrifying and beautiful. The tapping ceased, the hum faded, and the forest returned to its quiet state, leaving me alone but forever changed. I walked back to my cabin, every step deliberate, absorbing the lessons the forest had imparted. The encounters, the taps, the hum, the fog, the creature, they had all been teachers, reminding me of the fragility of reason, the importance of instinct, and the weight of respect in a world far older and stranger than I could ever fully comprehend. Fear was no longer my enemy. It was a guide, a companion, a mirror reflecting both the depths of the forest and the depths of my own humanity. And so I continue my patrols, moving through the trees with heightened awareness, with reverence for the unseen, with acknowledgement that there are mysteries we cannot solve, creatures we may never name, and lessons that only the night and the forest can teach. The taps on the cabin door were never just a sound. They were a call to witness, a test of courage, a reminder that in the presence of the unknown, we are both vulnerable and alive, capable of awe, fear, and the unshakable recognition that the world is far bigger and stranger than our minds can contain. The following mornings were quiet, almost oppressively so, as if the forest itself were exhaling after a long-held breath. But I knew the quiet wasn't empty. It was loaded with memory, with the residue of encounters that had stretched my perception of reality, that had forced me to confront something ancient, vast, and unknowable. Walking through the trails now, every step carried a weight of reverence I hadn't known before. I could feel the presence of the forest in a way that was no longer threatening, but profoundly alive. The subtle shift of air as something passed unseen, the faint hum in the distance that reminded me the woods had a consciousness, and the knowledge that some things were meant to be witnessed, not understood. In the weeks that followed, I reflected on what had happened, on how fear had reshaped me. The forest had become both classroom and mirror. I began documenting my experiences with painstaking detail, not for proof, not for validation, but for myself as a way to honor the lessons I had been taught. Each note, each sketch, each careful observation felt like a dialogue with the woods, a way to acknowledge the intelligence and mystery that moved in shadows and fog. I realized that fear, when approached with awareness, became a teacher rather than a tormentor. I started sharing my experiences with the rangers I trusted, carefully, cautiously, testing how much could be spoken aloud without ridicule. Some listened with polite curiosity, others with quiet skepticism. But those who spent long hours alone in the woods, the ones who understood that silence, darkness, and isolation carried lessons, knew exactly what I meant. They had felt the shift in the wind, the subtle intelligence in the trees, the momentary brush of presence that hinted at something beyond the ordinary. And in sharing, I understood something fundamental. The forest teaches differently to each of us, but its lessons are universal, bound by fear, awareness, and respect. I returned to the cave several times, always cautiously, never seeking confrontation, but hoping for understanding. Each visit deepened my sense of connection to the forest, to the creature, and to the intangible intelligence that moved through every valley, every ridge, every shadowed hollow. I realized that this presence was not malevolent. It was a guardian, a witness, a reminder that the world holds spaces humans were never meant to tame completely. In its silence, it taught me patience. In its observation, it taught me humility. In its elusiveness, it taught me awe. My patrols continued, each step now guided by instinct sharpened through fear, each breath attuned to subtle cues, each glance scanning for signs that might go unnoticed by the untrained eye. I learned to trust the forest as both ally and adversary, understanding that survival was not about domination, but about coexistence. The taps on the cabin door, the hums, the fleeting glimpses, they were markers on a path I was only beginning to understand, lessons in perception, courage, and reverence. And in the stillness of one final night, standing on the ridge overlooking the valley where it had all begun, I felt something shift. The fog swirled gently, the trees whispered in the wind, and for a fleeting moment I thought I saw it, the dark shape moving just beyond the edge of perception, watching me as I had been watched. But instead of fear, I felt clarity, an unshakable understanding that the forest and its mysteries were not adversaries. They were teachers, mirrors of our own limits, and reminders that courage is not the absence of fear, but the awareness of it, the choice to move forward despite it. I returned to the cabin that night, the taps silent, the air calm, and I felt a sense of completion, not victory, not conquest, but reverent acknowledgement. I had been tested, observed, and taught. I had faced a presence that defied explanation and emerged not unscathed, but profoundly changed. The forest had revealed its power, its wisdom, its patience, and in doing so, it had reshaped my understanding of myself. I knew now that the unknown was not something to be defeated, but something to be respected, studied, and integrated into the consciousness of those who walk its paths. As the first light of dawn touched the ridges, I understood the deepest lesson of all. Fear is the language of awareness. It signals the boundaries of knowledge, the edge of perception, the space where learning and growth occur. The taps on the cabin door were never just a sound. They were a call to witness, a summons to presence, a reminder that life in the forest, like life itself, is filled with mystery, wonder, and the infinite possibility of encounters that defy understanding. I remain a ranger, patrolling the trails, listening, observing, breathing the air of the forest that taught me to see beyond the ordinary. And though the taps may never sound again, though the figure may never reveal itself in the same way, I carry the lesson always, that courage is born in the face of fear, that awareness is forged in the presence of the unknown, and that the forest, endless, enigmatic, alive, is a mirror of the human heart, capable of awe, terror, and revelation. The taps may come again in some corner of the valley, in the hush of night, in the fog curling through the pines. And when they do, I will be ready, not to fight, not to conquer, but to witness, to listen, and to learn. For the forest, in its silence and in its shadows, has taught me what no map or manual ever could, that the world is wider, stranger, and far more alive than we can ever imagine, and that we are at our most human when we acknowledge it with both fear and reverence. I'm only telling you this because I can't keep hearing his voice alone. The radio still crackles at night, even though his call sign was retired years ago, even though we never found his body, even though his sector was 40 miles from mine, deep in a part of the forest no one should have been working alone. But he radioed for backup, and no one was near his sector. My name is Ethan Rourke, Senior Ranger, 21 years on the job. I've worked search and rescue in blizzards, wildfires, and flash floods. I've brought home bodies that look less human than the things this place hides upright in the trees. I've lost good people. I've lost people I still see standing beside me when I close my eyes. But nothing, rotted through my sanity like the night Harper went missing. Harper was new at the time, 6 months in, enthusiastic, polite, overprepared, the type of rookie who read every manual twice and brought an extra battery pack for every device. He reminded me of myself before the forest started talking back, before the shadows developed memory, before I understood that this place doesn't just swallow people, it keeps them close. The day he vanished, the forest was quiet in that wrong way. Not peaceful, not calm, just listening. Like the air itself waited for an excuse to shift. You learn to hear the difference after enough years. You learn the rhythm the woods are supposed to have, and when that rhythm snaps. I remember the heat most clearly. July, but hotter than July. Too hot. The kind of heat that doesn't just sit on your skin, it presses into you. You sweat even in the shade. You taste metal. You smell something scorched that you can't locate. The animals get jumpy. Birds lift from branches all at once for no reason at all. Elk stop mid-stride and stare at the tree line like they're waiting for something to step out. That morning, dispatch called me first. "Rourke, we've got a weird one. Harper didn't check in after his dawn patrol. Can you try to raise him?" I tried. Repeatedly. No response. That wasn't enough to panic. Radios fail more often than tourists think. Bad batteries, dead zones, faulty repeaters. But I felt something under all that logic, something low and instinctive, the way you feel a storm in the gut before it hits the ridge. Bang. By noon, the heat had thickened into the kind of oppressive air that makes your lungs feel too small. Sweat turned to grease, every smell sharpened, pine sap, hot bark, the diesel stink of the ATVs, and under it something burnt, like singed fur. Not strong, just enough to notice and hope you imagined it. At 1:17 p.m., Harper finally radioed in. I wasn't the one who heard it first. Dispatch recorded it and sent it through the emergency channel, flagged red. "Rourke, are you available? We have an active SOS. Voice confirmed, Ranger Harper, message unclear. I still have the recording. Sometimes I wish I didn't." His voice came through shredded like the signal was caught between frequencies. But it was his voice. Young, tight, trying to stay calm. I need backup. Something's, don't know what I'm looking at, more static than a hiss, like wind blowing across a mic, except there was no wind that day. He's not supposed to be out here. Then a long pause. Then, softly, "Why is he standing like that?" Another burst of static. Then, "Rourke, anyone?" Then something else, something behind him. Not a voice, a sound, wet like someone dragging a soaked tarp over gravel. Slow, deliberate. Then the message cut off. I was already throwing gear into my truck before dispatch finished replaying it. Sector K9. That was his zone. An old mining region scarred with sinkholes, half-collapsed tunnels, porous ground, and air pockets that make the earth sound hollow when you step. Most of it has been under restoration for the last 30 years. which is code for nobody wants to pay to clean up old industrial scars. It's shut down to civilians, too unstable, but we patrol it to keep poachers and explorers out. There are signs everywhere, warnings nailed to dead trees. Do not enter unstable earth, cave-ins. Reported authorized personnel only. People still go. But no one stands in that sector waiting for a ranger shift to pass by. Harper was right. Whoever he saw wasn't supposed to be out there. I reached the trailhead at 2:05. The air was wrong immediately. Too still, too hot. The forest felt crouched. Every pine needle pointed downward, motionless. Even insects had stopped. You don't understand how loud silence is until the woods take every sound away. Harper's ATV was parked crooked near the boundary rope, as if he'd stopped fast or someone else had braked for him. The keys were still in the ignition. His pack lay open in the dust. One bottle of water spilled, soaking the dirt into dark patches shaped like fingers. The heat intensified as I stepped past the rope. Not normal heat. Not weather heat. This came from the ground, radiating upward, wavering the air in shimmering bends like asphalt on a desert highway. I crouched and held my hand an inch above the soil. Warm. Too warm. Something was heating the earth from below. That burnt smell, hair, fur, something organic, pulsed stronger. I remember saying out loud, "Harper?" My own voice sounded too small. The trail into Sector K9 isn't scenic. It's brittle, chalky ground perforated with ventilation pipes from the old mining era. Most rusted, some sealed with caps. If you tap the right pipe with your boot, it echoes like tapping the lid of a metal coffin. That day, every pipe hummed. I kept calling his name as I moved deeper, but the sound didn't travel right. It came back flat, compressed, like the forest didn't want my voice leaving the trees. Half a mile in, I found the first footprint. Human, boot tread consistent with ranger-issued gear. Fresh, deep, too deep, as if the soil had been soft as mud, even though it was bone dry when I touched it. The second print was worse, same size, same boot, but rotated almost 90 degrees like he'd pivoted suddenly or been pulled sideways. Then I found the drag marks, long grooves in the dust like something heavy had been pulled. No footprints beside them. I followed. The deeper I went, the colder the air became. Not cooler, cold, like stepping from summer straight into basement chill. I could see my breath fog in July, under a sun so bright it should have been boiling the trees. Every instinct I had screamed to turn back. But Harper's radio was still clipped to my belt, replaying his last transmission every time I brushed the button. And guilt is a hell of a leash. I lost someone early in my career. A boy, 20 years old. We never recovered him. I still see him in dreams. Or something pretending to be him. Sometimes both feel the same. I wasn't going to lose Harper, too. The drag marks led to a collapsed mine entrance. Not fully sealed, just narrow enough to slip through if you angled your shoulders. Black, stale air pumped from the gap in rhythmic pulses like breath. The smell hit me before I got close. Burnt hair, wet stone, rust, and something sweet, wrong sweet, like fruit rotting in sunlight. I crouched near the opening and called again. Harper? Nothing. I clicked my flashlight on. The beam shot into the dark and stopped too soon, as if the shadows swallowed it whole. I should have waited for backup. I should have radioed in. I should have noted the time and temperature and followed protocol. Instead, I ducked inside. The moment my body crossed the threshold, the air changed. The forest heat vanished. The tunnel was freezing. Not cold, freezing, but the walls were sweating, warm to the touch, dripping condensation. The ground beneath my boots vibrated softly, like a heartbeat in stone. My light flickered. Ahead of me, deeper in the tunnel, something shifted. Not a person, not an animal, something standing too still for too long, something the same as a man, something exactly the size of Harper. I froze, my light trembling in my hand. The silhouette ahead didn't react, didn't move, didn't even acknowledge the beam wavering over it. It was just there, a shape the width and height of a ranger, shoulders squared, head tilted slightly toward the ceiling, feet together, hands at its sides. Everything about the posture was wrong. You don't stand like that unless you're unconscious, or dead, or pretending. I whispered his name. Harper? The silhouette didn't respond. For a moment, I thought it was a hallucination, one of those tricks the minds pull on your eyes when the air pressure shifts. But then, the shape exhaled. I heard it. A soft, wet hiss, too heavy to belong to lungs that size. I tightened my grip on my flashlight and took a step forward. The vibrations in the ground intensified, traveling up my legs into my chest. A low, steady pulse, like a generator running deep below the rock. I'd felt something like it during controlled demolitions, pressure waves echoing through stone, but this wasn't mechanical. It felt biological. Harper, it's me. Rourke. I stepped closer. The silhouette didn't shift. My light flickered again, then steadied. I angled the beam higher, catching the tunnel walls. Old mining struts, slick with condensation, carved marks I didn't recognize, streaks of dark residue that looked like soot but smelled faintly of sulfur. Some of the markings were fresh, too fresh. They glistened. Another step forward. The silhouette finally moved. Slowly. Too slowly, like someone remembering how to bend joints for the first time. It lifted one arm, stiff, mechanical, and pointed deeper into the tunnel. Not at me, not at the entrance. Into the dark. I swallowed hard. Harper, why don't you come toward me? Silence. Then the silhouette lowered its arm jerkily, as though its shoulder had locked. Another cold wave rolled through the tunnel, brushing my face like breath. But not from the silhouette. From behind it. From whatever it was pointing at. I should have run. I should have backed out and sealed the entrance and radioed in an emergency lockdown. But logic felt underwater. Muffled. Every instinct told me not to take my eyes off the silhouette, but every instinct also told me Harper was somewhere deeper, somewhere worse. If that thing wasn't Harper, then where was he? I took another step into the tunnel. The silhouette didn't move again. It stood frozen in that unnatural stillness, like someone waiting for a cue that never came. My light slid across its torso. The uniform looked right. The boots looked right. But the head... God, the head. The shape was right. But the angle was wrong, tilted too far back. Chin lifted at a painful degree, face pointed straight up at the ceiling. Not blinking, not breathing normally, just craning upward as if something above was whispering to it. I raised the beam slowly until it touched the face. It wasn't a face. Not Harper's face. Not anybody's. Smooth. Featureless, like wet stone pressed into the shape of a head. Only two shallow indents where eyes should be. I staggered back, boot scuff echoing in the narrow tunnel. The featureless head twitched, just a fraction, an involuntary jerk toward the sound. The indented eye pits turned toward me even though I hadn't made a noise since. My breath hitched. Don't run. Don't run. I stepped back slowly, never taking my light off it, then soft, barely audible. Behind the silhouette, Rourke, Harper's voice. Coming from deeper in the tunnel, my stomach dropped. He sounded exhausted, hurt, far away, but alive. That thing in front of me didn't react to the voice, didn't turn, didn't move at all. I skirted the tunnel wall, keeping as much distance between me and the silhouette as possible. The stone was slick, warm, pulsing with that deep vibration. My shoulder brushed it and I felt the thud echo in my ribs like a second heartbeat. The silhouette didn't turn as I passed, didn't follow, didn't breathe. It just pivoted its head slightly, tracking me with those shallow pits until the beam of my light left its body entirely. Then the whisper came again. Rourke, hurry. I moved faster now. The tunnel narrowed, forcing me to duck. The smell intensified, wet fur, burnt hair, and something chemical underneath it all, like old batteries leaking acid. My flashlight flickered again, and this time I smacked it hard enough to sting my palm. Stay on, stay on, stay on. The tunnel sloped downward suddenly, the floor turning from dust to wet stone. My boots slipped. The vibrations were stronger here, more rhythmic, almost timed. Something dripped steadily from the ceiling. I angled my light up. The stone sweated, but the droplets were dark, not water, thicker. They hit the floor with soft, sticky sounds. Ahead, the passage widened into a chamber. I heard Harper again. Closer now. Rourke, down here. I stepped into the chamber, and the temperature dropped so fast my lungs seized. My breath fogged instantly. The chamber was round, like a natural cave forced open by something not entirely natural. The walls were scored with dozens of long, deep claw marks, or tools marks, or something else altogether. Shapes drawn in the grime, lines crossing lines, patterns that made no sense but felt intentional. In the center of the chamber was a hole, perfectly round, perfectly smooth, descending straight down into black. A ventilation shaft, a collapsed tunnel, something dug, something burrowed. I stepped closer, shining my light into the darkness. The beam didn't reach the bottom. It just vanished, like the shaft swallowed the light. Then movement. Not below. Behind me, I spun around, nothing. But the chamber had changed. The tunnel I entered through wasn't behind me anymore, or at least not where it had been. Instead, there were 3 openings in the wall, all identical. Same height, same shape, same dripping lines of dark moisture, all leading into black corridors too uniform to be natural. My heart hammered. This wasn't a cave system. This was something carved, designed. The air pulsed again, one heavy thud through the stone, and the ground beneath me trembled. Then Harper's voice drifted up from the shaft. "Help, please." I dropped to my knees at the edge, shining the light down. My voice cracked. "Harper, I'm here. Just talk to me. Where are?" Then something touched my boot. Light. Barely pressure. I whipped around. Nothing. But when I looked back down into the shaft, the voice had changed. "Help." But it wasn't Harper's tone anymore. It was flat, hollow, like someone speaking through a throat that didn't understand pitch. Then, Rourke, drawn out, wrong, mimicked. No, 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 no. I stood up fast, backing from the edge. The chamber vibrated again, stronger this time. A low groan traveled through the walls like something waking up. Then I heard footsteps. Soft, wet, approaching from the left tunnel. Then the right, then the center. More than one. Slowly, steadily. I held the flashlight out in front of me like a shield. 3 silhouettes emerged at the entrances, all the same height, all with the same featureless faces, all wearing pale, distorted imitations of ranger uniforms. My mouth went dry. My hands shook so hard the beam jittered across the chamber. The silhouettes stepped in unison, 1 pace forward, then another. Their movements were too smooth, too exact, like puppets pulled on a single string. I backed up toward the shaft. Then a 4th voice spoke behind me, not from the tunnels, from the darkness below. Not Harper, not human. It said my name with perfect clarity. Rourke. The silhouettes froze. The chamber fell silent, except for the steady drip of dark fluid and my own breathing. Then, one by one, the silhouettes turned their heads toward the shaft behind me. All of them. Slow, controlled, as if listening for instructions. Something in the dark below shifted. Something large. The silhouettes kneeled as one. I felt the chamber exhale, and the warmth on my back, something breathing from the shaft, moved closer. I didn't think, I ran. I picked one of the 3 tunnels at random and sprinted into the dark, the flashlight beam jerking wildly. Something scraped behind me. More footsteps. Faster. The tunnel twisted sharply left, then right. I nearly fell as the ground turned slick, at the vibrations shaking the stone like a tremor. Something hissed behind me. Not human. Not animal. Wet. Hungry. Then ahead, finally, a glimmer. Faint. Daylight. I lunged toward it. Burst out into the trees. Collapsed into dirt and sun and heat. The forest was silent again, but not the right kind of silent, the wrong kind, the kind that listens. For a long time, I just lay there, face pressed into the dust, lungs burning. The sunlight felt unreal after so long in the cold tunnel. It didn't warm me. It only made the shadows sharper, the tree lines harsher. Every sound seemed carved too clean into the air. I pushed up slowly, testing my legs. They trembled beneath me, vibrating in the same rhythm the stone chamber had pulsed with, like the earth had synced something inside me to its heartbeat. The woods looked familiar, but not right. Same trees, same ridge line, same brittle summer-burnt undergrowth. But the silence. It's like I'd stepped into a photograph of the forest, not the forest itself. Then my radio crackled. I flinched so violently I nearly dropped it. Static. Then a voice. Harper's voice. Clear. Calm. Not strained. Not hurt. Not panicked. Just normal. Except Harper's radio was still clipped to my belt. I stared at it like it had just grown teeth. "Rourke, come in." "You there?" I didn't answer. "Couldn't. Rourke?" The voice sharpened. like it realized something was off. "Where are you?" My thumb hovered over the transmit button, trembling. Then I remembered the way the silhouette had spoken. The pitch wrong, the shape wrong, the way they'd all turned their heads at the same moment, obeying something deeper. "Rourke, answer me." I stepped backward, deeper into the trees. The radio flicked to another channel by itself. Channel 3. Dispatch frequency. A woman's voice now, soft, warm, someone I'd known for years. "Rourke, we're tracking your beacon. You're off route. Are you injured?" I hadn't activated emergency mode. My beacon shouldn't have been sending anything. I turned the radio off. The moment I clicked the power knob, the forest exhaled, a soft, low rush of air through every branch. Not wind. A reaction. My heart hammered against my ribs. I moved fast, half walking, half stumbling, putting distance between myself and that hidden shaft. The heat returned as I moved, oppressive, heavy, like the forest pressed closer with every step. By the time I reached the ATV, sweat dripped off my jaw. I tried the ignition. It didn't respond. Not dead, just unresponsive. Like the machine itself was refusing to acknowledge me. Fine. I could walk. The trail out was straightforward. I'd taken it 100 times. A shallow slope, then a bend left, then a stretch of wide path leading to the boundary rope. But after 20 minutes of hiking, I realized the trees were wrong. The slope was too steep, the soil too dark, the air too cold. I checked my compass. The dial spun slowly like someone was turning it with fingertips. No, 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 no. I shoved it back into my vest and kept moving. Fast now, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. Nothing followed. Nothing moved, but the sensation that something watched me thickened with every step, like eyes pressed into the back of my skull. Not one pair, many. Branches creaked overhead despite the lack of wind. Pine needles shivered like something brushed beneath them. I stepped over a fallen log and nearly gagged at the smell. Wet fur, burnt hair, sulfur. The same smell from the mine. I turned and saw footprints beside the log. Boot prints. Ranger boots. But not mine. Fresh. Perfectly spaced, walking parallel to my path, matching me step for step. My throat closed. I crouched and touched the nearest print. The soil crumbled like it had been pressed just seconds before. Something moved behind a tree 30 yards ahead. A silhouette. Tall, still, facing me, not hiding, just waiting. I stood slowly. The silhouette didn't move. I lifted my hand. It lifted its hand. My blood iced. I took one step backward. The silhouette took one step forward, not copying me, closing the distance. I turned and ran. Branches whipped my face. Pines clawed at my sleeves. The forest seemed to lean inward, narrowing around me, forcing me along a path I hadn't chosen. My boots slid on loose shale as I barreled down a slope far steeper than it should have been. Behind me, far too close, footsteps. Not running. Walking. Steady. Measured. As if it already knew it would catch me. I reached a clearing and skidded to a stop, so suddenly I almost fell. The trees ended abruptly. A sheer drop opened beneath me. A cliff. But there was no cliff in this part of the sector. I inched forward, peering down. A gorge split the earth, deep, black, filled with mist that didn't rise. It just sat there, heavy and unmoving, like a lid over something buried inside. A vibration rippled through the ground under my boots, the same pulse from the tunnel, the same rhythm. I stumbled backward. The forest behind me was silent. Too silent. Then I heard it. A voice, barely audible, behind me. Rourke, not a shout, not a call, a whisper, right behind my left shoulder. I spun around. Nothing. But the forest felt like it was closing in again. I had two options, jump into the gorge or run along its edge. I chose the second. I started moving, fast but careful, keeping as much distance between myself and the drop as possible. The gorge twisted left, then right, then narrowed until the opposite wall was only 10 feet away. A fissure. Too smooth to be natural, like something had split the earth in a single motion. As I followed its curve, a structure appeared ahead. A fence. Old. Government issued. Chain link reinforced with steel plates. A rusted sign hung crooked from the top rail. U.S. Geological Survey restricted site, do not enter. Part of the fence had collapsed inward, pulled, not pushed. The metal was bent in perfect arcs, like something had wrapped long fingers around it and peeled it back. Beyond the breach lay a cluster of structures. not modern, not maintained. Concrete bunkers half buried in the earth, cracked and moss-covered, steel doors welded shut, vents caked with rust, floodlights dangling like broken limbs. I stepped inside. The temperature plummeted immediately. My breath fogged, the air tasted metallic like old blood. A faint hum vibrated through the ground, familiar, whisper soft, the pulse. It was coming from beneath the bunkers. A chill climbed my spine. Rourke, the whisper again, this time from inside the nearest bunker. No, not inside, under it. I approached slowly, boots crunching through gravel. The welded door had a viewing window, slit-sized, too small to look into, but enough to see the interior. Dark, empty, except for drag marks along the floor, leading to a grate, a hatch, a tunnel. My pulse matched the vibration beneath my feet. I knelt beside the bunker wall, touching the concrete, warm, not sun-warm, heat from within warm. Like the mine walls, like the chamber, like the thing that breathed from the shaft. I backed away slowly. Something moved inside the grate. A shadow, no shape, just darkness shifting within darkness. Then a sound, soft metal clicking, like someone inside tapping the grate with fingernails. Tap, 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 a pattern, not random, not human. Then tap, tap, pause, tap. And a voice muffled. Let me out. I reeled backward. It didn't sound like Harper. It didn't sound like anything human. The voice came again, clearer. Rourke, let me out. It mimicked the tone perfectly now. Harper's tone, Harper's cadence, Harper's voice, but wrong. Too quick between syllables, too smooth, like it was learning the sound as it spoke. Then, behind me, footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming through the collapsed fence. I turned. A silhouette stepped through the breach. Featureless face, ranger uniform, boots leaving no sound. Another silhouette followed, then a third. I backed against the bunker wall, radio rattling against my vest. 3 silhouettes formed a line, blocking the exit. Then, in unison, they tilted their heads upward, matching that impossible angle I'd seen in the mine. Slow, controlled, listening. The grate behind me tapped again. Tap, 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 tap. Then the voice below whispered, "We hear you." I ran. Not toward the fence, not toward the woods, but toward the only remaining structure. The largest bunker, half buried, its roof collapsed inward. An opening at the base, just wide enough to crawl through, gaped like a wound. I lunged inside. Pitch black swallowed me whole. Gravel scraped beneath my palms. The air was freezing, thick with the smell of rust and old machinery. The hum beneath the ground grew stronger, so strong it buzzed in my teeth. Behind me, the silhouettes stopped at the entrance. They didn't follow. They just stood there, watching, waiting, as though they knew exactly where the bunker's tunnels led. The darkness ahead deepened. I swallowed hard and crawled forward deeper underground, into the cold, into the hum, into the place their voices came from. The crawl space narrowed the deeper I went until the ceiling brushed my back and the floor scraped my knees. Every inhale tasted like metal filings and wet stone. Every exhale fogged so thick it clung to my face like gauze. My flashlight beam jittered with my shaking hand, carving thin slashes of white through the dark. The hum beneath the ground, God, it was so loud now. It wasn't a vibration anymore. It was a pulse, a throb, a heartbeat, something alive beneath the concrete and rebar. I crawled faster. The tunnel dipped suddenly, and I slid down a slope of gravel straight into a larger chamber. My palms burned. My ribs slammed the floor. The flashlight spun from my hand and clattered across the concrete, coming to rest against something metallic, something round, something with a handle. A hatch. I scrambled for the light and swung it across the walls. This chamber wasn't natural. It was man-made. Reinforced beams, rusted machinery half embedded in concrete, old cables dangling like vines. A broken generator lay on its side, split open like something had crushed it from the inside. And on the far wall, in peeling red paint, Operations Level 3 authorized personnel only. It didn't make sense. This bunker wasn't on any map, not on the old geological surveys, not on the Ranger archives, not on any restricted federal documents we were cleared to see. But someone had built it. Someone had abandoned it or fled from it. The hum grew louder again. I aimed the flashlight at the hatch, heavy steel, bolted, sealed with a wheel crank. Something dark seeped from the edges, thin trails of fluid that dried into black crust along the floor. Footsteps echoed in the tunnel behind me. Slow, measured, not crawling, walking. I whipped the light toward the slope. A silhouette descended, perfectly upright despite the low ceiling, shoulders grazing the stone, head tilted at that same impossible angle. Behind it, two more followed. Standing where no person could stand, moving where no person could move. Their featureless heads turned toward me in unison. I stumbled backward until my spine hit the hatch. My flashlight flickered. Once. Twice. Hold on, hold on. The silhouettes stepped into the chamber. I twisted the hatch wheel violently. The silhouettes froze, watching. Their heads twitched with small jerking motions like animals trying to mimic human curiosity. The wheel groaned, metal grinding against metal. I forced it harder. Behind me, something tapped from inside the hatch. Tap, tap, pause. Tap. My chest tightened. Not again, not from below, not here. The silhouettes reacted instantly, every head snapping toward the hatch behind me, like the sound had summoned them, like they were waiting. Tap, and a voice seeped through the steel. Rourke, let me out. Harper's voice. Perfect, polished, rehearsed. My fingers slipped from the wheel. The silhouette stepped closer, slow, precise, obedient to the voice behind the hatch. No, I threw my weight into the wheel again. It screeched, turned, just a fraction. Inside, something scraped against the metal as if shifting closer to the opening. The silhouettes stopped inches from me, their featureless faces hovering above mine. No mouth, no eyes, no breath, only the faint smell of sulfur and wet fur wafting from their uniforms. I forced the wheel again. It spun fully. The hatch cracked open with a sharp exhale of cold air. My flashlight flickered violently, then died. Darkness swallowed everything. I backed away from the hatch, away from the silhouettes, blind, shaking, breath sharp and shallow. Behind me, something massive shifted inside the darkness of the open hatch. Claws or metal scraped the floor. A low, wet inhale filled the chamber. Not human. Not close to human. The silhouettes dropped to their knees in perfect sync, like worshippers. A voice rose from the blackness behind the hatch. Deeper now. Closer. Rourke, not mimicking, not pretending. Calling, summoning. My hand flew to my belt instinctively. The Ranger radio. I tore it free. Even dead, it clicked softly in my grip. I hurled it into the darkness behind the silhouettes. The sound echoed off the concrete, metal clattering, bouncing deep into the chamber. Every silhouette twisted toward the noise, heads turning one by one, perfectly choreographed. In the same instant, the thing in the hatch lunged toward the sound as well. An explosion of claws, stone, and breath. The silhouettes scrambled after it without hesitation, vanishing into the darkness beyond the hatch. I ran, blind, hands out, scrambling up the gravel slope on screaming legs. The hum beneath the ground roared now, shaking the concrete, rattling the steel beams, groaning through the bunker like the whole underground complex was waking up behind me. Something roared from below. Not animal, not human, not anything that should be able to live under layers of rock. My shoulders slammed into the crawlspace ceiling, but I kept going, hands bleeding, knees shredded, breath a knife. Behind me, sliding, scraping, something pulling itself through narrow tunnels that shouldn't fit it. No, keep going, keep going. The crawlspace narrowed farther. I clawed, dragged, pushed myself upward, ribs screaming every time I inhaled. Light appeared ahead, a pinprick, a sliver. The exit. Within reach. The tunnel behind me boomed as something slammed into the concrete. Dust fell onto my neck like ash. The hum reached a pitch that made my teeth ache. I shoved through the final gap, scraping my back raw on the stone, and lunged out of the bunker into daylight. The forest was still, not silent, not listening. Holding its breath, I ran across the gravel clearing, past the collapsed fence into the tree line. The moment I crossed the boundary, the hum stopped, cut clean, like someone flicked a switch. The forest exhaled, wind returned, birds chattered, insects droned, a pine branch rustled overhead. The normal world came back like someone had peeled a curtain from my ears. I didn't stop running, not until I reached the ATV, which still wouldn't start. So I kept running, down the slope, through the trees, until I reached the Ranger Road. I walked the whole way back to the station. Dust covered, bleeding, barely speaking. When I arrived, dispatch stared at me like she'd seen a ghost. "Ethan, where the hell have you been? Your shift ended 20 hours ago. We've been calling you all night. 20 hours." I checked the sun, the shadows, the clock above her desk. I had been underground no more than 2. No, that couldn't. She held up a radio. Harper's radio. "We found this broadcasting outside your cabin. We thought you'd left it behind this morning." Morning. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. She lowered her voice. "Ethan, we need to talk about the calls you made last night." Cold crept through me. "I didn't make any calls." Her face tightened. "You did. Multiple. But we couldn't understand the audio. Just static. And something else." She hesitated. Something like breathing. I felt the hum in my bones again. Deep, soft, remembered. Dispatch cleared her throat. "Search teams are still looking for Harper. But," she gestured toward the door, "a footprint, boot print, uniform boot print, pressed deep into the soil just outside the ranger station. Fresh, but facing the door, facing inward. Harper's size, ranger issued. Except I could smell it from the doorway. Wet fur, burnt hair, sulfur, the same smell from the mine. The bunker, the hatch, the thing that whispered my name. I told dispatch I needed air. I walked outside. I stared at the footprint. I waited for it to move. It didn't. But the ground beneath it vibrated. Once soft, slow, familiar, a pulse, an answer. And from the tree line, barely audible, carried on a gust of hot summer wind. Rourke, I turned. Every shadow between the trees stood just a little too still. Every dark space between trunks felt just a little too deep. None of them moved. But one of them was shaped like a man, the same height as Harper, standing perfectly still, waiting, listening. And its head tilted slowly, upward, just like the others. The radio on my belt crackled softly. A voice whispered through static, "Backup arriving. Hold position." But I knew better. No one was near my sector. No one had been. No one ever came when he called. And now, no one was coming for me. The printer in the ranger station screamed before it printed anything. That's the part I can't explain, no matter how long I stare at the memory. It made this shrill metallic shriek, like someone dragging a knife across steel before a single page slid out. No lights on, no job cued, no power flicker, just a scream, then the slow grind of gears waking up like it knew I was alone. I'm telling you this because I don't know how much longer my mind will hold the boundary between what happened and what I think happened. And if I don't say it now, if I don't put this in someone's hands, then the station wins. Or the forest does, or whatever's between them. My name doesn't matter. I've been a ranger for 17 years across 4 districts. I transferred out here, this stretch of high-altitude forest pressed against abandoned mining territory, because I thought the quiet would help. I told myself the air would clear my head after the disappearance, but nothing clears you after losing someone under your watch. Her name does matter. Lena, my trainee, 24, sharp, curious, too brave for her own good. I replay the moment she walked ahead of me into that ravine every night. I replay the part where she laughed, said something. I remember the shape of her smile, but not the words, and then turned the corner. I followed 10 seconds later. She was gone. No drag marks, no prints but ours, no sound except the wind shifting like it was holding its breath. I searched until my throat bled from shouting. The only thing I found was a patch of soil still warm, like something large had been lying there moments before. And a smell. Burnt hair and wet earth mixed together. I have never told anyone about the warmth or the smell. The official report says she slipped into a crevice. The unofficial word is she ran off. My word is the only one that doesn't fit anywhere, so I keep it silent. I transferred because the ravine didn't stop calling my name. The new station is older than it should be. Most are renovated every decade, but this one still has paneling from the 70s and a comms radio that hums like it's breathing. We're close to a cluster of old mines, sealed but not forgotten, spread along the valley like puncture wounds. The locals avoid them. Even the casual hikers who wander too far get uneasy when they hit the wrong trail. The forest here is quiet, too quiet. You can go hours without hearing birdsong, and even the wind feels muffled, like it struggles to move between the trees. I'd been here 3 months when the printer screamed. I was finishing the end-of-shift log, writing down the usual nothing: low visitor numbers, maintenance on the southern trail, checked radio tower footing. The kind of mindless ritual that helps me feel like the world still follows rules. Then the lights flickered. Only once, but enough to make me freeze because there's no reason for that. The grid out here is stable and the backup generator didn't kick in. I stood up, thinking maybe the breaker had tripped when the printer made that sound. Metal shriek, paper rustle. It spat out a single sheet. The room was dead silent afterward. So silent that I swear I could hear the snow melting outside, dripping off the eaves in slow, uneven ticks. I walked toward the machine like it might bite. It was an old thermal printer, the kind that shouldn't just start without being told to. It hummed once, then stopped. I pulled the paper out. At first, I thought it was a smear, a glitch, a dark streak that curved and bent like static. But the longer I stared, the more the lines sharpened, converging at the center like the edges of a tunnel drawn in a shaking hand. At the bottom, tiny letters burned into the paper, like someone pressed a hot type bar into it. I heard you. I sat down hard enough that the chair squealed. I don't know how long I stared at that sheet. Long enough for the world to feel thinner, like the air around me had changed. My heartbeat was the only real sound. I should have called it in. Should have radioed dispatch, reported faulty equipment, asked if someone sent a job remotely. Hell, should have run diagnostics, or laughed, or burned the damned thing. But all I could think about was the ravine. Because the last thing I did before losing Lena, the last word I said, was shout her name, hearing it echo back at me in a voice that didn't match the landscape. I heard you. I folded the page, put it in the desk drawer, told myself it was a prank, even though there are only 3 other rangers scheduled this month and none of them had been in the station. I went home. But the night didn't let me forget. I live in a small cabin half a mile from the station. No neighbors. No lights except the one by my door. The forest presses right against the back wall, thick with fir and spruce, their branches clawing at the siding when the wind picks up. That night, the wind didn't pick up. It stayed eerily still. And the forest felt alert. I heated a can of soup I didn't finish. I kept seeing that page, feeling its weight in my pocket even though I left it in the drawer. The sensation of being watched crept over me with every passing minute, like my own shadow was breathing against my neck. Around midnight, I heard something, soft, almost polite. A tapping sound, 3 taps, pause, 3 more, from the back wall. At first, I told myself it was a branch, a loose board, an animal. But the taps were too deliberate, even, rhythmic. I froze in my chair, spoon halfway to my mouth. The cabin seemed to tilt, my inner ear twisting, balance slipping, but the ground was solid. Tap, 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 then silence. Then a faint, muffled whispering, like voices beneath the floorboards. Not words I could make out, more like air being pushed through teeth. A chorus of almost sounds. I stood up only because staying still felt worse. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, boots crunching in the thin frost blanketing the earth. The air was wrong. I don't know how else to put it. It was thick, like inhaling through fabric, and warm. Too warm for a mountain night in early spring. My breath didn't fog. Walking toward the back of the cabin felt like stepping into a held breath. The trees were motionless. Every branch was perfectly still, as though frozen mid-sway. The needles didn't stir. The forest looked carved, not grown. I raised the flashlight. No animal, no person, no tracks. But the siding on the back wall had 3 small indentations, shallow, evenly spaced, like knuckles, but too large for anyone's hand, and at a height just below my shoulder. The smell hit me then, burnt hair, mixed with something wet and rotten like soil left to stew underground for years. I stumbled back, gagging, eyes watering. The flashlight flickered, not battery flicker, more like the beam bent for an instant. Then I saw it. To the right of the cabin, between the first 2 trees, a shape. I thought it was a man. A silhouette, tall, shoulders too broad, head tilted as if listening, but when I blinked, the shoulders narrowed, the head elongated, and the entire shape stretched upward, too fluidly, too silently, as if it were trying on different proportions. I didn't move, couldn't. My brain insisted it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast wrong. Exhaustion, trauma, anything. But then it stepped back, not walked, not turned. It slid into the darkness, absorbed by it, leaving only the smell behind. The forest exhaled. Branches swayed again. The cold returned so suddenly it stabbed my lungs. I went inside, locked every latch, sat in the center of the room until dawn bled through the windows. But that's not why I'm telling you this. I'm telling you this because of what the printer spat out the next morning. Not one page, 6. All blank, except the last. And the last one said, "You did not follow her." And underneath that, a set of coordinates. Inside the restricted mining zone, a place that hasn't been on any official map for 20 years. A place no one should be able to access the ranger station network from. A place I swore I would never go near again. I stared at those coordinates so long that the numbers stopped meaning anything. They blurred, warped, drifted, like they were floating just above the page instead of printed on it. But the location they marked, I knew it immediately, because I had been there once. When I first transferred to this district, one of the older rangers, Calloway, 30 years on the job and eyes like hollow stones, told me something I didn't understand at the time. He said, "Stay out of the black vein tunnels. They shift when you're inside. That's why the mine's closed. That's why they fence the land. Not because it's unstable, because it's alive." He laughed after he said it, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that comes from humor. More like he needed to release the words before they sank their teeth deeper into whatever was left of his sanity. I assumed he was messing with the new guy. I never went. Not then. But Lena did. She went once on a routine check of an old boundary marker. She'd only been out here 6 weeks. She came back pale, shaking, unable to describe what scared her. Kept saying the mine was humming, that she heard breathing inside the sealed shaft, that she didn't want to go back. She vanished 3 days later. I folded the coordinate sheet and put it in my pocket, the paper still inexplicably warm. I didn't tell anyone about the messages. I didn't even throw the pages away because part of me believed, no, part of me knew, I'd need them. As if someone was feeding me clues not meant for any other ranger. The station felt smaller after that, like the walls had crept inward during the night while I wasn't looking. Every hum of the generator reminded me of those tunnels. Every creak of settling wood mimicked that tapping on the cabin wall. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't sit still. The forest was unusually silent again. No birds, no insects. Even the distant rushing of water seemed muted. I packed a minimal kit. Flashlight, spare batteries, maps, field radio, sidearm, and a climbing rope for good measure. I didn't bring backup, couldn't justify the call without sounding insane. And I didn't want anyone else coming with me. I stepped onto the trail leading toward the restricted zone. The trees along this stretch always looked wrong, taller than they should be, trunks too straight, bark too smooth, like saplings forced upward too quickly, unnaturally. The air thinned the deeper I went, carrying that smell the mines were known for, old stone and rusty iron with a hint of decay. Halfway in, something brushed my ankle. I jumped back, flashlight already in my hand. The beam cut across the forest floor, nothing but dead needles and roots, but the sensation lingered, cold like a wet rope had flicked against me. I shook it off, told myself it was a twig snapping under my pants cuff. The lie held just long enough to take 3 more steps before the ground vibrated, a low, pulsing tremor, subtle but unmistakable, not an earthquake, a rhythm, like something breathing beneath the soil. I knelt and pressed my palm to the ground. It was warm, much too warm, a feverish heat radiating upward in steady pulses. That's when I made my first mistake, not turning back. I kept going, pushing deeper until the trail gave way to an overgrown access road, the one that led to the mine entrances. The fence that used to enclose the area was still there, but most of the barbed wire had sagged. One section had been cut clean through, not worn. Cut. like someone or something wanted in or out. The air beyond the fence felt heavier, as if stepping through broke some thin membrane. Even sound changed. My own footsteps seemed muffled. My breathing echoed faintly, as though I were already underground. I followed the coordinates through a thicket of alder and past a collapsed storage shed whose roof had caved inward like a crushed rib cage. A metal sign, half buried in mud, warned, "Danger. Mine shafts unstable. No entry. Federal Trespass Code 18 USC 1382. The wording was wrong. Mines don't fall under 1382. That's for military installations. Someone wanted people to believe this land belonged to the Department of Defense. But the rust wasn't right either. The sign looked old, decades old, yet the lettering was too crisp. I kept going. A narrow path veered toward the hillside. At the end was a carved-out hollow supported by cracked timbers. The entrance was sealed with slats of metal riveted across the opening, the seams filled with hardened pitch, or at least it had been sealed. Now one of the slats lay twisted on the ground, bent outward, not broken, bent, as if peeled away by something with slow, crushing strength. A metallic smell seeped from the darkness inside, like wet iron mixed with burnt hair, the same smell from my cabin. My flashlight beam quivered across the entrance. Dust motes drifted like ash. The mine exhaled warm air, thick and stale, coating my tongue with the copper taste of old blood. I should have run. Instead, I crouched and looked inside. The tunnel stretched farther than the beam could reach. A soft sound echoed from deeper within, too faint to place, too regular to ignore. Not footsteps, not dripping water. A whisper, but not directed at me. More like something was speaking in an unbroken stream, repeating itself, filling the space with quiet, frantic muttering. I told myself it was airflow, echo patterns, an animal, a trick of acoustics, but the words, if they were words, had cadence, breath, intent. My radio crackled, only for a second. Then a voice came through, not a ranger voice, not dispatch, a woman, her breath shaky, her tone distant. She said my name, not shouted, just stated, calm, flat, wrong. I froze, mouth dry. Static replaced the voice. Then another whisper layered over it. You didn't follow her. I dropped the radio. It clattered across stone, the sound unnaturally loud. When I grabbed it again, the channel was dead. I backed away from the mine, pulse hammering. I forced myself to think, to strategize, to behave like someone trained for wilderness emergencies, not someone being toyed with by an unseen presence. I needed to retreat, to regroup, to... The ground beneath me pulsed again, this time violently. Dust slid down the tunnel walls, the timbers groaned like old bones bending. A deep, vibrating rumble rose from beneath my boots, spreading upward into my legs, my chest, my teeth. Then the whispering inside the mine stopped. All at once. Silence slammed against my ears with physical force, followed by a single sound, a footstep, one step. Deep inside the tunnel, slow, deliberate, and wet. Something shifted in the dark, too large to fit the narrow space. My flashlight beam wavered as the tunnel seemed to breathe inward, pulling the light toward it. Then I saw movement, not a shape, a reflection. A pair of eyes catching the beam, low to the ground, far back in the tunnel, wide and unblinking, not glowing. Just reflecting the light like an animal's, except they blinked sideways. I stumbled backward, my heel caught on a buried root. I fell hard, air punched from my lungs. The eyes vanished. The tunnel exhaled again, warm, putrid, moist. I climbed to my feet, grabbed my pack, turned to run, only to stop dead. There were footprints behind me, fresh ones, leading from the woods toward the mine. Deep impressions, bare, human-like, but far too long, 20 inches, maybe more, with a gait too narrow for anything walking upright. And there were exactly 7. I counted twice, 7 steps, and then they stopped, right behind where I had been standing minutes earlier. No return prints, no trail leading away. Just 7, as though something had walked up to me, and then disappeared. My vision blurred at the edges, my pulse throbbed in my fingertips. The forest seemed to tilt, the trees leaning inward as if listening. I ran. Branches tore at my arms. Roots tried to grab my boots. The air clawed at my throat, hot one moment, freezing the next. By the time I reached the fence line, the sun had dropped behind the ridge line. Shadows stretched long and thin, distorting the trees into tall, reaching figures. Every crunch of dead needles behind me sounded like another set of footsteps, but nothing followed, nothing visible. When I finally reached the ranger station, the last smear of daylight clinging to the sky, the building was dark except for one window. The office, the printer room. Light spilled from it, flickering softly like someone was moving inside. But no one was scheduled on shift. I approached slowly, boots silent on the concrete. Through the window, I saw the printer, paper spilling from it, hundreds of sheets in a pile on the floor. Printing, printing, printing. I reached the door, hand trembling on the latch. The moment I pushed it open, the printer stopped. The room fell silent. The pile of paper on the floor rustled gently, settling. My flashlight beam skimmed the top page. 6 words printed in a shaky, compressed line. She is still taking breaths. I didn't touch the stack at first. I just stood there in the doorway, breathing shallowly, the beam of my flashlight trembling over the scattered pages like they were the shed skins of something alive. The silence in the room felt weighted, as though the air had thickened to hold whatever message had just been delivered. She is still taking breaths. I didn't want to think about what that meant, whether it was a taunt, a warning, or a truth. Whether it meant Lena was alive in some impossible way, buried somewhere inside those tunnels, or whether something wanted me to believe that she was. My hand shook when I finally reached for the top sheet. The paper was warm, not printer warm, body warm, as if it had been held or breathed on. Under the fluorescent lights, I saw the faintest blotches of moisture along the edges, like the paper had absorbed humidity from an underground cavern, or from lungs. I dropped it instinctively. Stepped back. My heartbeat echoed in my ears, uneven, jagged. The floor beneath my boots felt off balance, as if tilting, but the building wasn't moving. I forced myself to kneel and pick the page back up. Because fear hates evidence. Evidence pushes back, even if the evidence breathes. The printer had stopped mid-feed. A half-printed sheet hung from the rollers, frozen in place like it had been caught exhaling. The machine was still warm to the touch. A faint vibration hummed through the casing. I unplugged it. The vibration didn't stop. It lingered for a few seconds, then faded gradually, like something retreating into a deeper column of air. I shut the lights off, locked the room, and sat at the main desk with every door in the station within sight. I pushed my palms against my eyes until I saw colors, shapes, distortions, anything to override the image of those long footprints behind me in the woods. I needed time, space, logic. But logic doesn't hold when it's alone in the dark. The radio on my belt crackled. I flinched, nearly knocking over my chair. I fumbled for the device, static hissing through the speaker. Then a voice, not the woman from earlier, deeper, smooth but strained, like someone whispering through a narrow vent. You didn't follow her. My throat tightened. I turned off the radio, but the voice kept speaking for another full second after the power light died. Inside the device, or inside the room. I bolted upright. I've been in enough emergencies to know when panic sets the rules. Your surroundings warp first. Walls feel closer. Air feels thinner. Shadows sharpen. My thoughts move jaggedly like stepping stones that didn't quite align. I grabbed the coordinate sheet from my pocket and unfolded it on the desk. The numbers looked different. Not changed, just clearer. Sharper. As if my mind had blurred them earlier to protect itself. As if now, with everything unraveling, I had no defense left. I traced them with my finger. The location was deeper than the mine entrance I found today. The sheet pointed to a shaft that was never documented publicly, one the mining company had supposedly collapsed themselves before the land was seized. I'd heard rumors about it from a retired surveyor, stories about a lower level built without permits, dug long after the mine closed. He said the company tried to bury something down there, or someone. My flashlight flickered. Not the bulb, a shadow passed across the lens. A quick diagonal movement like a hand swiping the beam aside. But nothing stood in front of me. Nothing could have. The room felt colder. I stood up, the chair scraped loudly against the floor, echoing like a scream. My reflection in the station's front window caught my eye. distorted in the glass, elongated like my body couldn't decide where it ended. The forest outside was pitch black. No moon, no wind, just darkness pressing its face against the glass. I had to get out of the station. I had to go home. I told myself it was the printer messing with me, that the radio was glitching, that darkness magnifies fear. But as I reached for the door, a sound drifted through the walls. Breathing. Slow, unsteady. Coming from behind the drywall, as though the building itself had a set of lungs buried inside the studs. I backed away, shaking. Another breath. Closer. The drywall bulged subtly outward between the panel seams, like something was pushing its chest against the thin layer of paint. Then, 3 taps. Soft. Deliberate. The exact rhythm from my cabin wall. I ran. Didn't lock the door. Didn't look back. I sprinted down the path toward my cabin, flashlight beam swinging wildly, slicing the dark into fragments. Every few seconds, I felt that same vibration in the ground, like running over the heartbeat of something buried too shallow beneath the soil. My cabin appeared between the trees. The front door was open. Not wide, just cracked enough that darkness seeped through the gap like a slow leak. I knew with absolute certainty that I'd locked it before leaving. 2 deadbolts, a chain, all undone. I stopped 10 feet short, pulse pounding in my throat. My breath turned to fog now. The cold had returned. Real cold. Sharp. Honest. For a moment I felt sane. Then I saw the shape inside, a figure standing just beyond the door frame. Motionless. A silhouette carved from the cabin's darkness. The faint glint of my flashlight reflecting off its shoulder. Its head was tilted, too far, almost 90 degrees, like it was listening to the worms in the floorboards. My legs locked. I couldn't move or breathe. The figure didn't approach, didn't retreat. It just swayed, slowly, rhythmically, like breathing. I took a step back. The figure paused, tilted its head the other way. My flashlight flickered wildly, the beam stuttering across the shape. For a split second, I saw more detail. Skin, a face. I don't know, something pale, something stretched. My hand found a rock near the path. I picked it up without thinking, thrown back to every survival instinct I'd ever trained. I hurled it at the figure, aiming for the chest. The rock passed through it, not around it, through, like the figure wasn't made of anything solid. And as the rock crashed into the interior wall, the silhouette blinked out. Gone. My flashlight steadied. The cabin was empty. I stepped inside slowly, muscles trembling. The door swung shut behind me with a soft click, even though I hadn't touched it. The latch slid back into place. I didn't sleep, not that night. Not for the next 2. I kept the lights on, sat in the center of the room with my back against the stove, facing the windows, listening for taps, whispers, vibrations. On the 3rd night at 2:14 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text alert. Spotty cell service up here means it usually takes hours to send anything. But this came through immediately. Unknown number. She is still taking breaths in the dark. The message came with an attached photo. I hesitated before opening it. Every muscle screamed not to. But my thumb pressed the screen anyway. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a creature. It was a cave, not one I recognized. But the angle of the photo, the way the stone curled inward, the slick sheen along the walls, the blackness at the center, I felt it deep in my bones. It was underground. Far underground. The caption beneath the image appeared 1 second later. Come now. Below it, 7 footsteps left. Footsteps left, like the ones in the forest, like the ones leading toward me. 7. 7 exactly. Something was counting. Something knew how many steps separated us. That's when I understood, really understood, that whatever was reaching for me hadn't just found me. It had been following me for months, maybe years. And if it was right, if Lena was still breathing in the dark somewhere beneath those sealed tunnels, then this wasn't a haunting. This was a summons. I didn't pack a thing. Didn't change clothes, didn't leave a note, didn't radio anyone. I didn't even lock the cabin door behind me. It didn't matter anymore. Not when something could unlock dead bolts without sound, peel metal bindings off mine entrances like they were paper, or step through walls like mist. What mattered was the number. 7 footsteps left. Left until what? Until I reached it? Until it reached me? until whatever passed between Lena and the dark passed into me. The message didn't specify. It didn't need to. My body already knew. The dread braided itself into my spine, pulled me forward, pushed me toward the tree line like a hand pressed between my shoulder blades. The night swallowed me whole. No flashlight, not this time. The darkness was absolute, but somehow I saw just enough. The pale suggestion of a path, the faint shimmer of frost on pine needles, the outline of the mountains as a blacker shape against black. I don't remember making the choice not to bring light. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe dread is its own illumination, or maybe something didn't want me to bring a light. 10 minutes into the hike, a heat wave rolled through the night air. Winter 1 second, summer the next. My skin prickled. My throat tightened at the sudden shift. Heat pulsed from the ground in synchronized bursts like I was walking above a massive, buried heart struggling to keep rhythm. Every few seconds, I thought I heard breathing behind me. Not mine, not human. A layered inhale like something with multiple lungs taking turns. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The same way you don't turn around when you know the nightmare is standing right behind you. My steps guided themselves, falling into a pattern I didn't control. The woods bent around me in subtle ways, trees angled differently than they had earlier in the day, the trail narrowing where it had been wide, widening where it should have been tight, as if the forest was rearranging itself to funnel me toward the mines, or to trap me. Halfway there, the ground shifted beneath my feet. Not the soil, the sound, a thump beneath the earth. Then another, a slow, dragging shuffle from under the forest floor. I crouched, pressing my palm flat against the dirt. Warm. No, hot. A vibration traveled up my arm, into my elbow, into my jaw. My teeth buzzed. My vision flickered at the edges, as if the earth was pulsing in a rhythm my body wasn't built to interpret. Somewhere beneath me, something large was moving. The earth rippled minutely, enough that pine needles jumped off the ground. I moved faster after that, almost ran. Branches whipped my face, roots clawed at my ankles. Several times I stumbled, but each time something shoved me upright. Not hard, not hostile, more like a nudge from behind, a guide, a shepherd, leading me where it wanted me to go. When I reached the boundary fence of the restricted zone, the air changed again. Cold, bitter, like stepping into the shadow of something massive. The fence gate, which had been intact earlier that day, was now open, not twisted, not forced. Open. The padlock lay on the ground beside it, untouched, unbroken, unlocked. By what? By whom? The path beyond was pitch black. I walked through without hesitating, the temperature dropping further with each step until my breath returned in white bursts. Then the smell hit me. Burnt hair, wet stone, rotting soil, something metallic and fungal all at once. It seeped out of the ground like fog. My eyes watered, my stomach twisted, my throat closed. I covered my nose with my sleeve, but the smell slid through the fabric like smoke. I stopped at the tree line and listened. Wind? No, not wind. Whispering. The same frantic muttering I'd heard inside the mine earlier, but louder now. Closer. Like dozens of voices layered over one another, each trapped inside a thin shell of stone. I pushed forward. When the mine entrance came into view, my knees nearly buckled. The metal sheet that had been peeled outward earlier was gone. Not on the ground. Not nearby. Gone. The entrance was wide open, and the air spilling out was warm, damp, breathing. The tunnel walls glistened in the faint ambient dark, not with moisture, not with mold, with movement. Something thin clung to the stone, retracting slightly whenever I breathed too loudly. Not roots, not vines. Something that resembled skin pulled taut across bone. Something alive. The whispers grew louder, still indistinguishable but urgent, pleading, welcoming, warning, drawing. I couldn't tell. The sound pressed against my skull, vibrating the inside of my ears. I stepped into the tunnel and the temperature skyrocketed. Summer heat again. My sweat evaporated instantly, leaving a thin layer of salt on my skin. The air tasted metallic. My vision shimmered at the edges. Hallucination. I told myself it was hallucination, that it was exhaustion and fear carving patterns into the dark, that the smell was methane leaks mixing with trapped air, that the warmth came from deep geothermal pockets, but no geothermal vent breathes in sync with your pulse. No methane leak whispers your name, and no hallucination reaches out and touches the back of your neck. I froze. The touch was delicate, almost human. Fingertips brushing the base of my skull, cold and wet. I spun around. Nothing there. But the tunnel behind me had changed shape. The entrance was narrower, the ceiling lower. The path slanted in a way it hadn't seconds earlier. I wasn't imagining it. The tunnel was shifting, breathing, reacting, accepting me, or digesting me. I pressed onward because I couldn't turn back, not with the tunnel narrowing behind me like a throat closing around a swallowed object. The walls pulsed faintly. Moisture, or sweat, glistened along the stone. 7 footsteps left. The thought surfaced without permission. I had no idea how many I'd taken. I wasn't counting, but something was. I descended deeper. The air became thicker, harder to pull into my lungs, like inhaling through a soaked cloth. The whispers sharpened. Some were high-pitched, some low, some human, some not. Then, just as my legs began to shake from the heat, a different sound drifted toward me. A gasp, short, wet, desperate, human. I froze. Another gasp, coughed, choked, echoing faintly from the depths of the mine. My chest constricted. No, it couldn't be. I pushed forward, heart hammering against bone. The tunnel sloped downward sharply, then opened into a small chamber. My flashlight, useless deadweight I hadn't turned on, hung at my side. I didn't need it. The room glowed. A faint, pulsating light emanated from the walls. No color, just illumination, as if the stone itself was lit from within. The floor was slick, the air thick, and in the center, something moved, a figure lying on the ground, curled, trembling, hair matted to the stone. Lena, or something that wore her shape. Her shoulders rose and fell in shallow, ragged breaths. Breaths. She is still taking breaths. I stepped forward, legs shaking so violently I nearly fell. My throat burned. My eyes stung with tears I didn't trust. Lena? My voice cracked. The whispering stopped instantly. Every sound vanished. Her body stiffened. Slowly her head turned toward me. Her eyes opened. They were wrong. Too wide. Too reflective. Too dark. As if someone had sculpted eyes from water and shadow and forgotten to stop when they reached the uncanny line. Her mouth opened, not to speak, to inhale, a long, dragging breath that pulled the warmth from the room, from my skin, from my lungs. A breath that wasn't hers, a breath borrowed, a breath taken. Behind her, the wall pulsated, once, twice, then split open with a soft, tearing sound, revealing something moving behind it, something emerging. Something that had been breathing with her. The wall behind her opened like a wound made of stone and heat. No violence, no cracking rock, just a slow, soft peeling, the way lips part when someone is waking from a deep sleep. The glow inside the tear pulsed with the same rhythm as the air, the same rhythm as Lena's impossible breath. She was still facing me, still inhaling in that long, dragging way that felt like it pulled the marrow out of my bones. Lena. I whispered again, half hope, half plea. Her body twitched, not like a person waking, more like a puppet remembering its strings. Her limbs moved with jerks, halting, disjointed, knees scraping on stone, fingers bending backward for a moment before snapping forward into the right orientation. A relearning of shapes, of angles. Then her jaw shifted. Slowly. Too wide. Too deliberate. I stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the slick floor. My hands caught on the stone, which pulsed faintly beneath my palms like a slow, patient heartbeat. I couldn't process what I was seeing. My brain kept trying to rewrite it, reinterpret it as heat exhaustion, oxygen deprivation, trauma echoing through my senses. But no hallucination would explain the smell. Burnt hair and wet earth and metallic breath mixing around me like a living fog. And no trauma dream would explain her voice. It came out of her mouth without moving her lips. A whisper layered with 2 others like 3 voices out of sync. Follow her. My throat sealed itself shut. I shook my head instinctively, backing away, eyes locked on her too wide stare. Her body jerked again, harder this time. Her spine bowed, ribs stretching in sharp relief beneath her shirt. Something shifted under her skin, something that didn't match the human form she still wore. She crawled toward me. Not fast, not lunging, just advancing. Her palms slapped the stone with soft, sticky sounds, leaving faint smears behind, like sap or something wet and clear leaking from tree roots. Behind her, the tear in the wall widened. Something moved inside it, a shape too large to fit, folding and unfolding, as though deciding which configuration to take in the available space. Not a creature, not a person, a presence. The air in the chamber thickened, pressing against my chest, pushing into my lungs like a hand forcing me to inhale something I didn't want inside me. I scrambled to my feet. The room shifted, literally shifted. The walls slid a few inches, the ceiling dipped, the ground tilted. Not enough to knock me over, just enough to suggest that I wasn't standing in a room. I was standing inside something that could reposition itself. The tunnel behind me narrowed, then closed. Stone flowed like muscle, sealing off the exit. A trap, a throat, a digestion chamber. Panic finally overruled denial. A primitive, old human panic, the kind that predates reason. I slammed my hands against the wall where the tunnel had been. The stone was warm, warm like meat, warm like the underside of an animal's jaw. Behind me, Lena's limbs cracked. She stood wrong. Her legs straightened at mismatched angles, her hip rotating too far outward before snapping back into alignment. Her neck elongated for a moment, stretching like rubber, before compressing again, a distortion adjusting itself. She inhaled, her chest expanded far beyond human limits, her eyes fixed on me, still glossy, still reflective, showing me not myself, but the tunnel behind me that no longer existed. Her voice came again, three-layered, overlapping, growing sharper. She is still taking breaths. My vision tunneled. Sweat burned my eyes. My knees buckled. But then above the terror, another realization cut through. Those weren't her words. They were the mind's. The thing behind the wall. The presence inside the stone. Lena's body was a mouthpiece. A puppet. A lure. And I was the prey that made it move. The tearing seam in the wall pulsed. The shape inside pressed closer, and I saw not its form, not fully, but glimpses of it. A curve of bone-like structure bending and unbending, veins of faint light pulsing under what looked like stone but moved like muscle. Something immense, something ancient, something that wasn't meant to be found. A deep inhalation filled the chamber, a suction of heat and air that pulled at my hair, my clothes, my breath. Lena's body jerked again. This time like she was being reeled backward toward the wall, elbows bending the wrong way, fingers scraping grooves in the floor. She didn't scream. She didn't blink. She just stared at me as she was dragged toward that opening. I thought she was going to disappear into it. I prayed she would. Instead, the presence pushed her forward again, toward me, like presenting an offering. Not offering her to me, offering me to it. She took another step. Joints creaking, her voice, those three overlapping whispers, spilled into the air once more. You did not follow her. My legs gave out. I hit the floor, palms sliding on the slick stone. I scrambled backward until my shoulders hit the wall. It flexed around me. Flexed, like a ribcage. Lena bent down until her face was inches from mine. Her pupils dilated unnaturally, swallowing the irises. Her breath hit my skin. Hot, damp, metallic, human. Not alive. Something brushed my ankle, something cold, something invisible. Another footstep. The number hit me like a hammer. 7 footsteps left. The blood drained from my face, because now I understood. They weren't counting my steps toward the mine. They weren't counting its steps toward me. They were counting the footsteps left between me and becoming whatever Lena had become. 1, 2, 3. It touched my ankle again. 4. It brushed the back of my knee. 5. A cold pressure pushed against my spine. 6. Lena leaned closer, her face stretching subtly, like a mask softening on a too hot surface. Her lips parted, and this time the voice that came out was singular, clear, unmistakable. My trainee, not a hallucination, not a memory. She whispered, "You should have followed me." The 7th touch hit the back of my skull. Not hard, gentle, a caress. The chamber inhaled, warm, rotting, alive. The light inside the wall flared, then the stone folded forward, closing over me. Sudden black, no pain, just pressure, just heat, just the sensation of being held in something enormous, something ancient, something that had been waiting for more than a human lifetime. something that had learned to breathe through those it swallowed, something that remembered every scream. The last thing I felt was Lena's hand, cold, impossibly cold, sliding into mine as the mind sealed itself around us like a tomb. And the printer, miles above, in the ranger station, spat out one final message into an empty room. The next one should follow you soon. I've always believed the forest had a rhythm of its own, a pulse you could feel if you listened closely enough. My name is Caleb. I'm 32, and I've been a forest ranger for 10 years. Not the rookie wide-eyed type, not the guy who dreams of heroism or recognition. My job is to preserve, to observe, to intervene only when the forest itself allows. I work in the Northern Cascades, a stretch of wilderness so vast that even a week of patrolling leaves entire valleys untouched, undiscovered. People say I'm lucky, that I have the perfect life, surrounded by towering firs, glacial streams, and the occasional fleeting glimpse of deer or black bear. But luck has little to do with it when the nights are silent and the woods start to whisper. I remember my first encounter with real fear vividly. It was early October, the air sharp with frost even before dawn, and the campgrounds were empty, except for a few diehard hikers who'd forgotten to respect the early warnings of the season. I was doing my morning sweep when I noticed something odd. The birds weren't singing. That's usually my first clue that something is off. I thought it was just a quirk of the weather until I caught a shadow moving in the fog, a shape that didn't belong to the terrain. My first instinct was to rationalize. A bear? Maybe a stray hunter? But then I heard it. Not a growl, not a roar, but a low, guttural hum, resonating through the mist like the forest itself was vibrating beneath my feet. The hairs on my arms stood straight, the chill on my neck more than just frost. I froze, hand hovering over my radio, ready to call for backup, yet something inside me told me to wait. The forest was watching. I've always trusted my instincts, but that morning, instinct itself betrayed me. I stepped forward, crunching dry leaves, and the shadow moved again, faster this time, weaving between trees with a deliberate intelligence that no animal possessed. The hum grew louder, and my stomach sank, twisting in ways I didn't understand. I felt like an intruder in my own home, and suddenly every story I'd heard as a kid, campfire tales about Sasquatch sightings, missing hikers, things that lurk beyond the trail markers, flashed through my mind. I called out, voice steady, trained, yet shaking underneath, "Who's there?" The fog swallowed my words. There was no reply, only the faintest echo, as if something had learned to mimic me. I spent the next hour following the sound, moving cautiously, feet slipping in wet moss, eyes straining to see anything beyond the gray veil. And then I saw it. Not fully, just a massive outline hunched near a creek, impossibly tall, covered in dark fur that absorbed the weak sunlight. It vanished before I could take another step. My rational mind screamed, "Bears don't stand upright, they don't vanish into fog," but something deeper, primal, told me I had seen exactly what I thought I had. That morning changed me. I didn't tell anyone, not my fellow rangers, not my supervisors, because who would believe me? Even I struggled to reconcile it with my years of experience, my grounded understanding of the wilderness. But every patrol after that, I felt its presence again. Subtle at first, a broken branch where none should be, the rustle of leaves without wind, shadows that lingered just beyond vision. The forest was awake, and it was observing. I began to notice how the woods themselves could shape fear, pressing it onto your chest like the weight of wet snow. A breeze might carry the scent of something foul, rotting meat or damp fur, and your mind would instantly associate it with whatever that shadow had been. One night, a few weeks later, I was responding to a call about a missing hiker near Marble Creek, a place locals warn against after dark. I had been driving slowly, headlights carving cones of illumination through the dense trees, when my truck's radio fizzled and went silent. Static, low at first, then sharp and almost conversational. I could swear I heard my own name whispered in the hiss. Heart hammering, I parked, stepped out, and the forest greeted me with a cold, unnatural stillness. Even the creek, usually gurgling pleasantly, sounded muted, like it had been sucked of its voice. I followed the path, flashlight cutting through the shadows, each step crunching on frost-crisp leaves, when I stumbled on a footprint, enormous, wider than any bear, deeper than any human's, leading off the trail into darkness. I've never felt the weight of being watched so acutely. The further I went, the thicker the fog became, curling around my legs and soaking my boots. My rational brain tried to make sense of it. Landslides, animal prints, hallucinations induced by fatigue. But then I heard the knock. Soft at first, 3 quick taps like someone drumming on hollow wood. I froze. It came again, this time closer, echoing across the trees, repeating in patterns no human could keep. I wanted to call it off, to retreat to the safety of my truck, yet I found myself moving forward, compelled by the need to understand, to confront whatever had become a ghost in my familiar woods. It was then I realized fear can be a teacher. Not the cheap, adrenaline kind you get from watching horror movies or hearing a late-night rustle. The kind that digs into your bones, that forces you to question every assumption about the world you've built, the kind that humbles a man used to authority over nature. That night, I followed the sound to a clearing where the fog thinned, and there, standing under a skeletal pine, was a figure. Tall, impossibly large, features obscured, but eyes glinting with a strange intelligence. I froze, lungs tight, yet the figure didn't charge, didn't move. It simply watched, and in its silence I felt every error I'd ever made, every time I'd underestimated the wild, every time I'd ignored the warnings whispered by instinct. The hours blurred. I couldn't tell how long I had been there. Eventually it moved, or perhaps I moved, slipping backward without thought, and vanished into the darkness, leaving only footprints and a deep, lingering sense of wrongness. When I finally returned to my truck, frost covering my jacket, fingers numb, I realized I had survived, but the encounter had changed me. The woods weren't just alive, they were sentient, capable of noticing, testing, waiting. And I had to respect that, not just for my survival, but for my sanity. Since then, every shift, every patrol has been a careful negotiation. I've learned to read the signs, subtle changes in temperature, the whisper of leaves and impossible patterns, the faint, musky odor that signals something watching from shadows. Each encounter is a lesson in humility, patience, and awareness. I've learned to follow fear without succumbing to it, to trust instincts but balance them with experience. And I've learned that the forest is a mirror. If you step inside with certainty and arrogance, it will remind you of your fragility. If you move with respect and attentiveness, it reveals itself in ways most people never see, even in the daylight. I've had other encounters since that first October morning. One involved a series of caves up near Granite Ridge, where hikers had disappeared without trace. I spent nights listening to the wind howl through crevices, certain that something moved just beyond the reach of my flashlight, waiting, learning. On one particularly cold evening, I felt breath on the back of my neck, turned slowly, and caught nothing. But the snow around my boots was disturbed, as if a giant had walked in silent footsteps. The mind wants to rationalize it. Animal, wind, hallucination. But I knew, in a way you only know after being faced with the inexplicable, that it was something else entirely, something ancient, patient, and intelligent. The strangest part is that fear becomes addictive, not in a thrill-seeking way, but in a deep, existential way. You begin to notice things others dismiss, patterns in shadows and sounds, truths hidden behind the mundanity of routine. I've come to understand that being a ranger is as much about reading the forest as it is about protecting it. You must anticipate danger, not just from animals or accidents, but from forces that dwell in the dark, in places humans rarely go, and in moments when the woods decide to wake up after midnight. It's a delicate balance, one I navigate every day. I never enter a clearing without scanning every edge, every shadow, every rustle. I approach caves with caution, knowing that the silence inside is thick, oppressive, and intelligent. I listen to the wind not for weather forecasts, but for messages carried by its direction and pitch. Each night, I leave markers along trails, not just to help me find my way, but as subtle signals that someone has passed, someone has observed, someone respects what is beyond comprehension. And yet, I've never let the fear dominate me. It's always there, lurking, teaching, reminding me that my confidence is fragile. I've learned to move within it, to let it sharpen my senses rather than paralyze me. Because the truth is, the forest doesn't care about courage or bravado. It cares about respect, attentiveness, and the ability to survive in harmony with what cannot be tamed. There are moments, though, when that harmony shatters. Nights when the fog rolls in thick and heavy, the creeks murmur distorted, the wind carrying whispers that could be human or something older, stranger. On nights like those, every crack of a branch, every low growl in the distance, every shadow that seems too tall or too deliberate reminds me that the forest is alive in ways most cannot fathom. That's when I understand the real meaning of being a ranger. Not protector, not hero, not observer, but witness. Witness to a world that exists just beyond the veil of reason, where fear is both teacher and companion, and where survival is never guaranteed. I've come to cherish those nights, not because of the fear itself, but because they remind me how small I am, how temporary my presence, and how precious every breath is when the forest wakes up after midnight. The next weeks were a test I hadn't anticipated. Each day, each patrol brought new reminders that the woods were far more aware than I had ever allowed myself to believe. I began to notice subtler changes first. The way the fog lingered in unnatural pockets, refusing to drift even when the wind picked up. The distant calls of animals that didn't belong to the area, or at least not in the numbers I was hearing. And always the faint, almost imperceptible hum, like a vibration threading itself through the trees. Some days I convinced myself it was fatigue, stress, or imagination, but deep down I knew better. The forest had memory. It could react, and in ways no human could anticipate. One evening, I was called to a remote part of the park to check on a series of broken trail markers near Cedar Hollow. The air had a strange stillness, as if the forest itself had exhaled and then stopped breathing. My truck barely carried me through the thickening fog, tires crunching on frost-bitten leaves, headlights struggling to pierce the gray veil. The silence was heavier than the cold. I parked and stepped out, boots sinking into soft mud. I remember thinking, almost out loud, I should be alone out here. But even as I said it, my gut twisted with unease. Something was out there, watching, calculating, aware of every step I took. I followed the trail markers, flashlights slicing the fog. The woods seemed to stretch unnaturally, paths looping where they shouldn't, tree trunks that hadn't been there before forming walls I hadn't noticed. The more I moved, the more I realized that I couldn't rely solely on sight or sound. My senses had to expand. I felt vibrations in the ground, subtle shifts in air pressure, even the scent of moss and decaying pine needles taking on a strange, almost coppery tang that made my stomach lurch. And then I heard it, the snap of a branch, too deliberate to be random, breaking somewhere behind me. I froze, every nerve in my body alive. My first instinct was to call it out, but my voice caught in my throat. The forest seemed to hold its breath with me, listening for my reaction. The snapping continued, rhythmic now, almost like footsteps pacing, stopping when I stopped, moving when I moved. I realized with a sinking horror that I was being followed, but by what? I couldn't tell. Shadows loomed, larger than animals, moving in ways my mind refused to categorize. The rational part of me tried to name it. Bear, elk, hunter. But even as I tried, my instincts screamed that none of those explanations fit. I decided to turn back, carefully retracing my steps. That's when I caught a glimpse of it. A hulking figure, massive and upright, just beyond the fog's reach, staring at me. Its eyes glinted faintly in the flashlight's reflection. Intelligent, calculating, unyielding. I wanted to run, but my legs were rooted, mind racing to rationalize, to deny. It didn't move closer, didn't make a sound, yet the weight of its presence pressed against me as tangibly as the cold on my skin. I understood in that moment what the old stories meant when they said the woods, wake up. The forest itself was alive with intent, and this creature, or whatever it was its guardian, its observer. Eventually the figure vanished, melting into the fog as if it had never been there. My breath came in shallow bursts, chest tight, legs trembling. I returned to my truck, heart hammering, yet a part of me couldn't stop thinking about the intelligence behind those eyes, the awareness behind those movements. I realized then that fear wasn't just about survival, it was about understanding. The forest had rules, and I was learning them the hard way. Every broken trail marker, every whispered sound, every shadow that moved too deliberately was a lesson in humility. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in my bunk at the ranger station, replaying the encounter in my mind, dissecting every movement, every sound. The forest had left me a message, subtle but unmistakable. You are not alone, and you do not understand. My mind refused to quiet. Every wind through the pines sounded like whispers. Every distant howl or groan of wood bending under frost seemed like communication. I realized fear could extend beyond the moment of danger. It could haunt you, shape your perception, warp reality until you questioned your own sanity. Weeks passed, each patrol layering onto the last. I began to notice patterns. Fog rolled in heavier after certain calls, shadows lengthened in particular valleys, and the creatures, or presences I glimpsed, only appeared when I was alone. Sometimes it was the rhythmic snapping, sometimes distant, inhuman laughter, and occasionally I found footprints larger than any bear, pressed deep into the soil, leading away from the trail and into areas the maps labeled as impassable. I resisted the urge to tell anyone. Rangers are trained to dismiss fear, to rely on logic, to protect credibility. But credibility felt meaningless when the forest itself began to redefine reality around me. One late autumn evening, I was dispatched to investigate a camper's report near Silver Pine Creek. The camper had described lights moving erratically, shadows shifting in ways that seemed impossible. I approached slowly, flashlights sweeping, boots crunching frost-bitten leaves. The creek was alive with fog, the water glowing faintly in the flashlight's reflection. I felt it before I saw it, a presence, massive, patient, waiting. The lights the camper described weren't fireflies or lanterns. They were reflections, glints in eyes that watched me from a distance. I called out softly, identifying myself, trying to maintain control. The forest replied with silence, thick and heavy, until I heard the first vocalization, a low, resonant growl, not animal, not human, vibrating through the air. My pulse spiked, mind racing to identify the source. The growl was followed by footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling, coming from all directions at once. I realized then that I had no concept of spatial orientation here. The fog, the terrain, the shadows, they conspired to disorient. I moved forward cautiously, aware that any rash action could provoke whatever watched. Then it appeared, a figure, colossal, fur glinting faintly in the moonlight, eyes reflecting a strange intelligence, limbs moving with unnatural grace. My rational mind screamed denial. Bare, hallucination, tiredness, but everything in my body knew otherwise. It tilted its head, studying me, and I understood, in a way words cannot capture, that it was measuring me, assessing my intentions, gauging my respect for its domain. Fear and awe collided, leaving me paralyzed in the frost-hardened mud. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time was distorted, and finally the figure vanished as silently as it had arrived. The fog cleared slightly, revealing the creek in its normal, serene state. I returned to the station, shaken, clothes damp, nerves raw. I knew without question that the forest had tested me, had gauged my response, and deemed me worthy to leave. But the lesson was indelible. Presence, awareness, humility. These were not optional in the wilderness. They were survival. From that night on, I began keeping detailed journals of everything I noticed. Footprints, patterns in fog, changes in animal behavior, auditory anomalies. Each entry became a thread in a larger tapestry I was only beginning to comprehend. My encounters grew more frequent, subtle at first. A rustle that wasn't wind, a low hum that wasn't insect or stream, shadows too deliberate, too calculated, but increasingly bold, pressing the boundaries of my understanding. The forest had become a teacher and a tormentor. My days were spent in routine patrol, guiding hikers, inspecting campsites, rescuing the occasional lost soul, while my nights were filled with reflection, anticipation, and preparation. I learned that fear could be managed without denial, that observation could be sharpened by respect, and that survival depended not only on skill but on humility before forces you cannot name. The forest demanded patience, discipline, and constant vigilance, and in return it granted glimpses of truths too vast for ordinary comprehension. Yet, even with my growing awareness, moments of sheer terror remained. One night, following a report of a missing hiker near the upper ridge, I encountered something I cannot fully explain. A cave, hidden behind a veil of fog and underbrush, exhaled a cold breath as I approached. Inside, the walls seemed to hum, echoing my own heartbeat, amplifying the sound until it was a roar in my ears. Shadows shifted independently of the flashlight, twisting, pulsing, almost alive. And in the far corner, a massive form crouched, watching, its eyes, reflecting faint starlight, fixed on me with intelligence and patience. I understood then that the cave itself held secrets, memories, guardians. My presence was an intrusion, measured and noted. I stepped back slowly, careful not to provoke. My breath fogged the air, heartbeat loud enough to feel in my chest. The forest outside seemed to wait, anticipating my reaction. I left the cave and returned to the ridge, shaken yet exhilarated. I had survived, but I had also witnessed, and in that witnessing, my understanding of the forest deepened immeasurably. Every encounter reinforced a truth I cannot escape. Fear is not merely survival, it is communication. The forest speaks in ways humans are not trained to hear, and those who listen with respect gain insights denied to arrogance. I have learned to move with the rhythm of the woods, to anticipate without presumption, to respect without fear paralyzing me. I have learned that what we cannot name may still be present, still aware, still teaching. And I have learned that the forest will always wake up after midnight, whether we are ready or not. The following weeks felt like walking in a dream where the edges of reality blurred. I began noticing subtle patterns in how the forest reacted to me, almost as if it had a memory of my movements, my routines, and my fears. It was no longer just the fog, the shadows, or the unnatural footprints. Now the very terrain seemed to shift in response to my presence. Trails I had walked 100 times seemed unfamiliar, and creek crossings that were once simple obstacles twisted into labyrinths. I began leaving markers for myself, but sometimes they would vanish or appear in places I had not set them. I had always trusted my training, but the forest was teaching me a new law, one I could not read and one I could not ignore. One night, after a long day rescuing a lost family near Raven's Peak, I drove back to my ranger cabin, exhausted. The moon was a faint sliver behind clouds, and the wind had picked up, carrying an unplaceable scent that made my stomach tighten. Iron, wet earth, and something else, sharp and metallic. I stepped out of my truck to check the cabin perimeter, routine patrol habits ingrained from years of discipline. That was when I noticed the first sign, prints in the frost leading toward the back door. They were massive, far larger than any human or bear, but unlike anything I had ever seen. I crouched to examine them, heart pounding. The prints did not look like they had been made by claws. They were padded, deliberate, precise. Someone, or something, had been there while I was driving. Inside the cabin, I secured the doors and checked the windows, every nerve alert, every muscle tensed. I told myself it was probably a bear. Rationally, it made sense. But the silence that filled the cabin contradicted logic. It was oppressive, unnatural, almost sentient. Then came the sound. A knock, soft and deliberate, not on the door, but somewhere in the cabin, as if the walls themselves were communicating. My skin crawled. I moved slowly, every step calculated, flashlight in hand, scanning corners, cupboards, even the shadowed rafters. Nothing. But the sensation of being watched did not dissipate. I slept fitfully that night. Dreams filled with impossible landscapes, fog so thick it swallowed entire hills, shadowed figures that moved independently of the terrain, caves that opened into vast, like uncharted chambers. Each dream ended the same way, with a presence looming, watching, waiting, its eyes gleaming with intelligence and purpose. I woke each time drenched in sweat, hands shaking, mind racing. Even awake, the forest seemed to follow me. The wind carried whispers, the trees shifted when I was not looking, and the frost outside my window sometimes displayed prints too large to belong to any known creature. Then came the incident at Hollow Pine, a series of caves I had been called to investigate after campers reported voices and lights that were not there. I approached cautiously, flashlight sweeping, boots sinking into mud and frost. The entrance loomed like a dark mouth, exhaling cold, damp air that carried the faint smell of iron and decay. As I stepped inside, the sound of water dripping echoed, but beneath it I heard something else, a low, resonant growl, vibrating through the walls and the floor, syncing with my heartbeat. Shadows twisted unnaturally, and my rational mind began to fray. I went deeper, each step measured, breath shallow, every nerve screaming. And then I saw it, crouched in a chamber where the flashlight barely reached. A figure immense, fur dark and matted, posture upright, eyes reflecting faint light like twin lanterns. It did not move immediately. It simply studied me, head tilting, chest rising slowly. I wanted to flee, to retreat, but something held me rooted, a mixture of fear, awe, and a primal curiosity I could not deny. The air thickened, every inhalation tasting metallic, cold, and alien. My instincts screamed to run, yet my training and fascination compelled me forward. The figure rose, taller than any bear, limbs long and powerful, muscles rippling beneath dark fur. Its movements were deliberate, graceful, almost human in their precision, yet undeniably something else. I noted every detail, the shape of its hands, the way it balanced on massive feet, the subtle sway of its shoulders as it assessed me. Then it moved, not toward me, not away, but around me, circling, observing, making no sound beyond the occasional snap of its massive fingers against a rock. The forest seemed to pulse with it, alive in a way I had never fully comprehended. This was no accident. This was not random. This was a test, a message, a reminder of my place. Hours, or perhaps minutes, passed. Time in the cave was elastic, distorted by the presence of something I could not name. I realized then that my survival depended on stillness, on respect, on attunement to a rhythm beyond human comprehension. I spoke softly, almost whispering apologies for intruding, for daring to enter its domain. The figure paused, head cocking, and for a moment I felt a flicker of recognition, or perhaps understanding. Then, as silently as it had appeared, it vanished, leaving the cave empty except for my shallow breaths and the echo of dripping water. I emerged into the night, frost-covered, heart-hammering, nerves raw. The forest was quiet now, but in a tense, expectant way, like a predator watching from a distance. I realized that the fear I felt was not just instinct, it was communication. The forest, and whatever guarded it, had a language, subtle but undeniable. My role as ranger had shifted from protector to witness, from observer to participant in something ancient and incomprehensible. After Hollow Pine, I became increasingly attuned to the forest's rhythms. I learned to recognize its signs, the unnatural stillness before an encounter, the faint metallic tang that often preceded appearances, the subtle patterns in footprints, the whispers carried by wind through the trees. Each patrol became a negotiation with a consciousness far older and wiser than any human mind. I could no longer rely on maps, GPS, or standard safety protocols. Survival demanded intuition, patience, and humility. Yet even as my awareness grew, so did the intensity of encounters. One night near Ironwood Ridge, I followed a series of glowing eyes across a frozen stream. They moved deliberately, too fast for deer, too calculated for wolves. The fog thickened around me, and the forest seemed to stretch unnaturally, folding in on itself. I stumbled across a den, impossible in size, carved into the rock, lined with broken branches, leaves, and mud. And there, inside, crouched a figure, massive, eyes gleaming, observing me with a patience that felt infinite. I froze, boots sinking in mud, flashlight shaking in my grip. The creature did not attack or approach. It simply watched, testing, weighing. Fear gripped me, primal and undeniable, but so did understanding. This was the forest asserting its presence, reminding me of my fragility, teaching me again that respect was not a choice but a necessity. I left slowly, retracing my steps, never breaking eye contact until the fog swallowed the figure. My pulse remained elevated long after I returned to camp, but a strange sense of gratitude accompanied it. I had survived, yes, but I had also learned. The forest had become a teacher, a tormentor, and an enigma. Each encounter sharpened my senses, deepened my humility, and challenged my assumptions about reality. I understood that my role was no longer simple. I was a guardian of people, yes, but also a witness to forces beyond comprehension, a student of fear, a participant in a dialogue older than humanity itself. The forest did not forgive arrogance or ignorance. It rewarded attentiveness, patience, and respect. I learned to move differently. I no longer relied solely on sight or sound. I relied on intuition, on subtle vibrations in the earth, on sense that carried meaning beyond recognition, and on patterns and shadows that suggested presence. I trained myself to endure fear without succumbing, to listen without interrupting, and to observe without interference. The woods were alive, yes, but they were alive in ways that demanded participation, not dominance. And through it all, I began to understand that encounters with the unknown were not accidents. They were invitations to humility, lessons etched in frost, shadow, and fog. Each time the forest woke up, each time I saw the hulking figures, each time the cave exhaled cold and intelligence, I was reminded of the fragility of reason, the necessity of patience, and the enduring presence of forces older than comprehension. The woods were not merely a backdrop. They were protagonists, teachers, adversaries, and mirrors, reflecting the depth of my courage and the limits of my understanding. Winter had begun to edge the forest in frost and ice, and with it, the presence I had grown to recognize intensified. Nights were longer, shadows deeper, the fog heavier, as if the forest itself had pulled a curtain across the land, inviting only the brave or the foolish to enter. I could no longer rely on patrols as routine. Each shift became an exercise in vigilance, patience, and calculation. Every step was deliberate. Every sound, every shadow, every flicker of movement could signal danger, or a lesson I hadn't yet learned. I no longer feared the forest simply for its darkness. I feared what it demanded from me, the endurance it required, the humility it instilled. It was near the northern ridge, past Timberfall Creek, where the forest finally forced my understanding to its limits. Reports had come in from hikers who vanished along the upper trail. I was alone, as usual, flashlight cutting cones through thick fog, boots sinking in frost-hardened leaves, radio static crackling faintly at intervals that seemed to echo my own heartbeat. I moved cautiously, listening to the forest, trying to distinguish natural sounds from the unnatural. The wind carried whispers, low and guttural, indistinct words that hinted at intent. It was as if the forest had begun speaking directly, testing whether I could understand. Then came movement, slow, deliberate, just beyond my vision. A hulking figure emerged from the fog, massive limbs gliding with fluid grace. Eyes glimmered faintly, reflecting the beam of my flashlight. Fear gripped me instantly, primal and undeniable, but so did the sense of inevitability. This encounter was not a chance. I had walked into its domain knowingly, and now the forest and its guardians demanded engagement. My mind raced, trying to rationalize bear, shadow, hallucination, but instinct screamed denial was impossible. Every fiber of my being recognized the intelligence, the patience, the consciousness behind the form. The creature did not move closer, yet I felt its presence everywhere. The fog seemed to pulse around it, obscuring the edges of my perception. I realized then that the forest itself was a participant, shaping perception, manipulating distance and light, forcing me to confront fear on a level deeper than mere survival. I spoke softly, almost pleading, introducing myself, acknowledging my intrusion, attempting to show respect without provoking aggression. The forest was listening. The creature tilted its head, eyes tracking every gesture, every inhalation, every tremor of fear. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had become meaningless. I stood rooted, torn between flight and observation, my senses stretched beyond ordinary comprehension. And then slowly it moved. Not toward me, not away, but around me, circling, testing, weighing. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. The forest seemed to shift in response to its movements, shadows deepening, fog thickening, branches bending as if alive. I understood suddenly and with a terrifying clarity that my survival depended entirely on the harmony between my actions and the forest's will. One misstep could provoke consequences beyond imagination. Eventually it vanished, slipping silently into fog and darkness, leaving only the echo of its presence. I remained in place long after, chest heaving, mind trembling, yet profoundly aware. The forest had allowed me to witness, to survive, but it had also left an indelible mark. Respect was not negotiable. Courage alone could not protect me. Awareness, humility, and patience were the true shields against the unknown. The encounters continued, each one more intense, more demanding of my presence and attention. One night near Whispering Pines, I discovered a series of caves hidden behind thick underbrush. From within came a low hum, resonant and measured, synchronized with the rhythm of my heartbeat. I entered cautiously, flashlight slicing through the darkness, aware that even the slightest sound could provoke observation. Shadows twisted unnaturally, shapes forming and dissolving at the edge of perception. And there, crouched in a far chamber, was the figure I had come to recognize, the guardian, sentinel, enigma of the forest. Its posture was deliberate, movements precise. It watched without speaking, its eyes reflecting faint light, studying my reactions as though reading my soul. I understood then that the forest itself was alive in ways beyond comprehension, and this creature was its embodiment. An intelligence, a presence that measured, judged, and taught. Fear surged, undeniable, primal, but so did comprehension. This was not merely survival. This was initiation into a covenant older than humanity, a recognition of limits and awareness beyond rational understanding. I retreated slowly, careful not to provoke, and as I emerged, the forest seemed to exhale, settling into an uneasy calm. That night, sleep was a fragile thing. Dreams returned with greater intensity. Caves stretching endlessly, shadows twisting independently, whispers that carried meaning, warnings and instructions that I could not fully decipher. Each dream ended the same way, with the presence, immense and patient, observing, awaiting, always aware. I awoke with frost on my jacket, pulse racing, yet a growing understanding. Fear itself had become a teacher, guiding me, shaping me, imparting knowledge in its own unforgiving way. Over the following weeks, I began noticing subtler lessons. Footprints, the way fog settled in unnatural formations, the rhythm of the wind through trees, everything became language. Each patrol was an exercise in observation, patience, and humility. I learned to move in harmony with the forest, to anticipate without presuming, to respect without hesitation. The supernatural presence that had first terrified me became paradoxically a guide. It demanded vigilance, courage, tempered by awareness and understanding that survival was entwined with respect for forces far beyond human comprehension. But fear remained, persistent and necessary. It kept me alert, honed my senses, forced me to reconcile reality with the inexplicable. One night, following a report of a missing camper near Iron Hollow, I ventured deeper than ever before. The fog thickened, transforming familiar trails into labyrinths. Shadows moved independently, following, converging, retreating. I found a cave hidden behind an overhang, exhaling icy breath that carried metallic tangs. Inside, the walls seemed alive, pulsing subtly, as though synchronized with a heartbeat that was not my own. And there it was, massive, upright, eyes gleaming, limbs moving with grace and intelligence. I froze, breath shallow, mind racing. The creature didn't approach, didn't roar, didn't move beyond observation. Yet every instinct told me its presence was overwhelming, testing, evaluating my awareness, patience, and respect. I realized then that the forest through this guardian had become a mirror, reflecting courage, humility, and fear back at me in equal measure. My survival depended not on weapons, tools, or bravado, but on attunement, on comprehension, on willingness to accept limits beyond reason. I left the cave slowly, retracing my steps, leaving no trace of intrusion. Outside, the fog swirled as if exhaling, settling back into its normal rhythm, leaving only the memory of presence and lesson. I returned to camp, soaked, exhausted, heart pounding, yet profoundly changed. The forest had communicated again, through silence, observation, and presence, teaching me to listen, to understand, to endure. I was no longer merely a ranger. I was a witness, a student, a participant in a dialogue that spanned eons, and the forest's sentience had made itself unmistakably clear. By the time the deep winter settled over the northern Cascades, I had learned that the forest's lessons were relentless, precise, and impossible to ignore. I no longer walked the trails with casual confidence. My senses were attuned to every creak, every whisper, every subtle shift in temperature or scent. The fog, once merely a cloak for the unknown, had become a messenger. Shadows, once frightening anomalies, were now communicators, revealing presence, intent, and awareness. I understood finally that fear was not something to conquer, but something to honor. A tool that sharpened perception, preserved life, and taught humility. It was near midnight, one of those nights when the moon was nothing more than a sliver behind heavy clouds, that the forest demanded its final lesson. I had received a call from hikers reporting strange lights and sounds near an abandoned cabin deep in the pines. Alone, as usual, I drove carefully along frost-bitten trails, headlights barely cutting through the thick fog. The wind carried faint, unfamiliar scents, wet earth, pine sap, and that metallic tang that had become an unmistakable herald of presence. My pulse was steady, trained from years of patrolling, yet every instinct screamed alert. I knew I was not entering an ordinary forest. The cabin emerged through the fog, dilapidated, frozen in shadow. I approached, flashlight cutting across walls warped by time and weather. The silence was oppressive, unnatural, almost sentient. Then I heard it, the low, resonant hum I had to recognize, threading through the trees, through the walls, through the frost beneath my boots. I froze, every muscle taut, every nerve alive. The forest was awake, fully awake, and I had entered its private domain. From the tree line, the figure appeared, towering, massive, limbs moving with deliberate grace, eyes reflecting faint moonlight. It did not advance, did not threaten. It simply observed. And in its presence, I felt the culmination of every lesson, every encounter, every night of fear and vigilance, humility, patience, awareness, respect. The forest had tested me through months of encounters, and now at last I understood. Survival was never about dominance, it was about attunement, about walking in harmony with forces that operate beyond human understanding. The air thickened, fog curling around us, swirling, alive. I could feel the pulse of the forest, synchronized with my heartbeat, stretching outward, connecting every branch, every root, every stone. My mind raced, but I no longer sought to impose understanding. I simply observed, listened, breathed. The creature tilted its head as if acknowledging comprehension, and then slowly, silently, it retreated into the darkness, melting into shadow and fog. The forest exhaled. Time resumed its ordinary rhythm. The lesson was complete. I stayed there for hours afterward, frozen in place, the cold pressing into my bones, but my mind clearer than it had ever been. I realized that the forest had always been alive in ways I could not name, that the guardian I had glimpsed was merely a manifestation of that awareness, and that every fear I had felt was part of a dialogue older than any human presence in these woods. I understood then that being a ranger was not merely about protection, not about authority or heroism. It was about witnessing, understanding, and respecting. Walking back through the frost-coated trails, every step deliberate, every sound absorbed, I felt the weight of gratitude and awe. I had been tested, not as a man seeking recognition, but as a participant in the ancient rhythms of a living wilderness. The cold, the fog, the shadows, the presence, they were all teachers. Every encounter had stripped away arrogance, fear of the unknown, and superficial understanding. I was no longer simply a ranger. I was a student of the forest, an observer attuned to its language, its rhythm, and its relentless intelligence. That night, and in every night that followed, I began to move differently. I approached trails with patience, caves with reverence, shadows with attention. I no longer dismissed the subtle signs, the broken branch, the unusual rustle, the shift in fog or wind as mere coincidence. Every detail became meaningful, a thread in the fabric of awareness that connected me to the forest. I had learned that the true measure of courage is not the absence of fear, but the discipline to move within it with clarity, respect, and understanding. Over time, I shared fragments of these lessons with colleagues, though carefully, selectively. Fear is contagious, and the unprepared cannot comprehend the forest's sentience without risking their sanity. Those who listened, however, began to notice changes in their own perception. Subtle awareness of patterns, intuition sharpened, understanding deepened. The forest had a way of teaching those willing to observe, and it demanded humility in return. Every ranger who enters these woods after midnight carries the same responsibility: to witness, to respect, and to honor forces that are beyond naming. I have learned, too, that the forest's guardians are not merely threats. They are reminders of the fragility of human understanding, of the necessity of humility, of the awe-inspiring scale of life beyond our comprehension. Each encounter has left marks, not scars visible to the eye, but imprinted upon my awareness, shaping how I perceive the world, how I move within it, how I understand fear. They are permanent teachers, and their lessons echo long after the fog lifts, the shadows retreat, and the frost melts beneath the winter sun. Now, when I patrol, when I walk trails, when I examine caves or cross frozen creeks, I carry those lessons with me. I move carefully, attentively, alive to every shift, every sound, every shadow. Fear is no longer an enemy. It is a companion, a guide, a measure of awareness. And I know with a certainty that cannot be shaken that the forest awakens after midnight, not to terrorize, but to remind us that we are small, that life is vast, and that understanding requires patience, humility, and the courage to witness the unknown without succumbing to it. Even now, years later, I feel it. The pulse of the forest beneath my boots, the hum threading through the trees, the eyes watching from shadowed depths. I have walked with fear, observed its language, and emerged more alive, more aware, and infinitely humbled. The forest remains eternal, sentient, and unforgiving in its lessons. And I am left with the knowledge that no matter how much we prepare, how skilled we become, or how brave we are, there are truths that only the woods after midnight can reveal. In the end, being a ranger is not about control. It is about presence, observation, and respect. The forest tests, it watches, it teaches. And those who listen will learn, gradually, deliberately, that survival is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of attention. To walk these trails after midnight is to understand fragility, to honor life, and to witness the extraordinary intelligence of the wild. Every crack of a branch, every whisper of wind, every shadow and fog carries a message. And the forest waits for those who are willing to listen, willing to learn, willing to move within fear without losing themselves. I still hear it sometimes, the low hum, the soft tapping in frost, the weight of unseen eyes. It is not malevolent. It is aware, patient, eternal. And in those moments, I remember the first October morning when I felt the pulse of the forest beneath my feet, the shadow that vanished before my eyes, the lesson that fear can teach. And I know, finally, that the woods wake up after midnight, not to frighten us, but to reveal what we cannot otherwise perceive, the depth, intelligence, and awe of a world far larger than ourselves, and the fragile, precious place we occupy within it.